Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Critical Podcast. I'm your host, Jimmy Good, and joining me once again is my very special guest slash friend, Manny. Manny, how you doing?
Hello, I'm doing great, man. Happy holidays. We're in
Yes.
the thick of it, if you will.
Yes.
After Christmas, before New Year's, I guess we were talking about it before we started, like Boxing Day. We
Yeah.
think the 26th. I'm pretty sure that's Boxing Day. So to all of our, UK friends, happy Boxing Day.
Yeah,
You
happy
know?
Boxing Day from us to you. I was
Yeah,
joking before with Manny about Boxing Day. I was like, I do not know. We need to, one of these days, we're going to sit down and look up what all that means, but it's
yeah.
not today.
We'll do
So
an episode on Boxing Day,
that would be
perhaps. You know?
great. Yeah, I'd be like, it has nothing to do or everything to do with boxing.
Yeah.
Like, there you go.
You decide. Tune in to find out.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, thank you so much for coming back on the show. It like breaks my
Of course.
brain every time I try to introduce you because I'm just like we're just like good buddies now. I just want to be like, "I'm my good buddy Manny," but you're a special guest
Yeah.
in my heart. So,
Oh, you're
uh,
so.
and you've been requested you just a few times now, and people just they can't get enough Manny. They say that you're kind of a hot ticket, Manny. So
I
I want
love
you to
it.
know that
That's
it's just
so flattering.
just what I've heard from other folks.
I get too much of Manny, so I'm happy to share. Happy to pass it along.
That's great. And it also kind of dilutes me, so that's a good thing. But anyway, we're talking today about the sequel to The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, which is The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug. Now, if you haven't seen that last episode or some of the other Lord of the Rings focused shows I've done with Manny here on the show, I'd recommend you check those out because we're going to go full spoilers on this one. This movie came out a couple years back now, so you probably
Yeah.
have seen it if you were interested at this point. And there's also an extended edition. We stuck mostly to the original or just kind of theatrical cut. If I went back, I'm not to that point yet, Manny, with them, with like Lord of the Rings, where I could go back and watch it and be like, I know that's added, I know
Yep.
that's added, I know that's added.
Yeah.
So one of these days, I'll go back and do that. But a lot of it was like additional like fight scenes and kind of like gore and stuff, especially for Battle of the Five Armies, which I think had an
Yeah.
R-rated extended
Yeah,
edition
you might be right about
or
that. Yeah.
director's cut or something. It's pretty crazy. I was like, really
Yeah.
R-rated? They started swearing constantly. It was really controversial. It was
Yeah,
like they
there was
went
like
off
a gun.
script.
Somebody took a gun out, and there was like a stabbing, and drugs were involved. There was a whole thing. It was a
Yeah,
whole thing.
Thorin had his little hands on the button for the thermonuclear device. It was like
Yeah.
it was crazy. Anyway, but we're talking about Desolation of Smaug today, which, like I said, that middle movie, which I think a lot of people in a trilogy kind of, I don't know if you want to say look down on. They're kind of like, this is kind of it should be like the meat of the sandwich, but a lot of people are like, oh, it's not the climax of the whole thing. It's just kind of here. It's kind of, padding things out, even though a lot happens in this movie. And I had to kind of remind myself how much does happen. And the beginning of this movie is weird because you don't expect it, but we start a year before the entirety of The Hobbit. We start back at Bree at the Prancing Pony. We're getting Fellowship vibes right away. We see Peter Jackson is still that dude with the carrot living in
Love
Bree.
carrots. Yeah, I
60
love
years
carrots.
on, he just doesn't matter to him. But we get Thorin, who's going into the Prancing Pony, and seems like he's about to be jumped by a few people before he runs into Ian McKellen playing Gandalf, who kind of, they start talking about like, oh, you gotta go get the Arkenstone, you gotta reunite the people, you gotta kick that dragon out of the lair, and here's this key that I came by. Don't even worry about it. Even though I don't know how he got that key. I should say he gives that key up in
Right.
Hobbit, right? Unexpected Journey.
Yep. He does, yeah.
So
Yeah.
at the time, Gandalf maybe was in possession of it or not, the key into Erebor. But yeah, I don't know how you feel about that scene, man. Because like when I watch it, all it does is make me want to watch Fellowship immediately.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because I think a lot of us fans of the films, like we watch the three Hobbit movies with that like, man, I just want to go back and I want to watch the trilogy because like especially with a lot of the settings and of course the recurring characters. But yeah, man, I mean it's interesting too because the Prancing Pony is it's like a stepping stone in both the Fellowship trilogy and the Hobbit because it's kind of like where the first and lesser so for the Hobbit, but it's kind of like where the first like real meat conflicts take place. And so it's just this interesting like I don't want to say like no man's land, but it's like a vestibule, like when you enter a building and there's like you're in that square of doors before you're actually in the building. That's what I feel like the Prancing Pony is in these films. It's like a vestibule where you're like you start to think about like, okay, how am I going to get into this building? Like what's going to happen when I'm in this building? So it's this like middle ground almost.
Yeah.
But it does, I mean, like the setting is so cool. Bree is like a really neat place, I think. and so I think it just sets the tone for the movie. Yeah.
You know, it's funny you bring that up now because now it's making me think of it in a different way. And it's kind of like, what if the cantina on Mos Eisley in Star Wars was like kind of nice and there's like a few bad people in there, but everybody else is kind of having a good time and keeping to
Sure.
themselves? Like, that's what like the Prancing Pony feels like. And I feel like
Yeah.
that, like the Prancing Pony is the closest to like bleeding into it almost feels like it could be in Harry Potter. Like, and the town of
Yeah.
Bree could
Totally.
be Harry Potter-esque, but
Yeah.
that's where it starts to divulge from the two paths, because like Harry Potter is still kind of clamped and cluttered, or cramped I should say, and they're all kind of like, those movies don't feel as wide or as, you know, vast
Right.
as Lord of the
Right.
Rings becomes, and especially Fellowship does that. And
Yeah.
you know, that, like I said, that's how this one starts, and I think it's very much a nostalgia ploy. Like for us Lord of the
Definitely.
Rings fans, it's like, ugh.
Yeah. And I think, like, the Shire for sure, but Bree, the first time I saw Bree in the Fellowship, it felt like it was the first indication, a meaningful indication, at least for me, that there's a world beyond the stories of the main characters. It's like this place where, like, the people in the bar, like, don't even care that Frodo's there, or don't even care that now Thorin's there, or Gandalf, whatever. There's stuff going on regardless of our main characters, and so that for me was like, oh, cool, like this world is alive, and there's people who are going about their days and their nights and having a drink after work or whatever. And it does a similar thing in the Desolation for sure.
Oh yeah. Well, and the nice thing is that it kind of, I guess, is supposed to be, if you hadn't seen Unexpected Journey, it kind of
Hmm.
gives you like just enough of that setup to be like, all right, I know Gandalf if you're familiar with Lord of the Rings, and there's this new guy who apparently
Yeah.
they're going to need somebody to help them out on this. And at the time, this was again a year before Unexpected Journey, and Gandalf's like, I might know a guy, you know, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
at the time, it's like Bilbo was just a hobbit chilling out at Bag
Right.
End. He wasn't like a world class like thief
Totally.
or smuggler or anything like that.
Yeah.
But then they cut to Bilbo, who's kind of like the scout for the party now, and he's integrated in with the dwarves, and
Yep.
they're on the run. Like they're running from their lives from these orcs that are just doggedly pursuing them on their wolves, their wargs, and
Yeah.
then we get right we get away from that because that's where it like shows the desolation. You know, it shows them like above the mountains. For some odd reason, that title sticks with me. I don't know why.
Oh,
Desolation of
totally.
Smog, like, when it shows that title card, it has really sticks with my brain. But
Yeah.
this was like everybody. It was like, this is what you wanted in Hobbit, and you didn't get in Unexpected Journey, was the dragon, and that's like, it's they're teasing it the whole time, even in the title. But they're like, okay, we're gonna wait a little bit still. There's plenty more to do, because then we get to Mirkwood, which has changed a bit. It used to be, correct me if I'm wrong, Manny, the Greenwood. Was that what it used to be called, or they kind of maybe called it that?
Yeah, I think it just speaks to like the kind of like times are changing kind of
Yep.
thing, and I think it's like kind of the evolution of that race and like kind of how they settled themselves. And now, especially with like the impending ring tension, I think it's them kind of they're always sort of they're not like clairvoyant, but they kind of have a sense of the larger world around them, and they're very conscious about the ongoings of the world. And so it is, I think, an indication of that evolution of saying like, okay, we're growing. We have to maybe like make ourselves a little bit more defendable. We need to be able to kind of like build out, the way we live.
Oh, totally. And this is the part when and he does this a lot now upon watching both this and the original trilogy. Gandalf loves to split apart from the group a lot. And this is one of the,
Like that.
it's great because it's like he just has like a moment where he'll be like, I need to go check something else out. And they're like, well, you kind of said that this was a big mission and you'd hang out with us. And he's like, I'm totally in it for the long haul, boys, but I
Yeah,
gotta go and
I
I'll be
got some
back.
books.
I
I
got,
have a book and maybe some key, perhaps dust and things.
yep.
Yeah,
I need to go check this out because I've got this kind of bad news and I need to check into what Radagast has been telling me. And
yep.
this is where the separation comes. We'll get back to Gandalf later because it's kind of more appendices stuff. But
Hmm.
we get into Mirkwood, and the Mirkwood sequence, it kind of goes on a little long for me, and it's very purposeful because it's like they're like supposed to stay on the road to Mirkwood. If they go off the Elven path, the dwarves and Bilbo will be lost forever.
Right.
And then like the wood kind of turns on them. They start to get lost a bunch, and then Bilbo eventually has to climb up and out of the trees. And I love that moment because it feels so suffocating the whole time. And when he finally gets out, he can breathe again and look around, and he's like, "Oh, I see the Lonely Mountain." You know, we're kind of on our
Right.
way there. But then they get jumped by all of these horrible, basically little Shelobs, these spiders who kind of grab the whole team, which is very reminiscent and freaky if anybody's Return of the King fan, to see like what if Frodo times like 13 or 11 or
Right.
whatever, 12. It's like, and they all get captured except for
Yeah.
Bilbo, who uses the ring as a utility item very efficiently. We don't often see the ring used. Like, he uses the ring and has a way with it that I don't think Frodo ever did. Like, he uses it
Yeah.
a lot, and maybe it's because Sauron's not at full power and he's not like a giant eye isn't screaming at him the whole time. He can just kind of go into the ring realm, as it
Yeah.
were, and kind of just like, oh, you know what? I'm just gonna be chill and cool. What do you think of this version of that kind of that realm, plus the fact that you can finally understand the spiders talking?
Yeah, I think it's really cool, and I have this one of the books that I've taken a couple notes in. It's called the Dark Powers of Tolkien by David Day, and his other book, The Illustrated World, I think I talked about in the last episode. But there's a whole like family tree of essentially like all the evil forces
Oh, cool.
in Tolkien's Legendarium, and so there's all these spiders and like the important ones and like the lesser important ones and like Shelob's like I think somewhere in like the upper middle.
Okay,
And
good.
so like there's this it gives you a sense of like hierarchy with these like evil forces, and so it was really cool to just get a little bit more of a glimpse. Like in Return of the King, it's just like there's a spider, I don't know, and
Yeah,
it's in a tunnel, I don't know, and it eats people, sure. Whereas this is a little bit more like, oh, okay, they're coordinated, they can speak, they can communicate, and they're like part of a bigger thing. And similar to my comment about Bree, like it does add to that world building. um and like you mentioned, like Bilbo using the ring, it's cool because like lesser is kind of known about the ring, and he, at least to him personally, he hasn't like had it for very long, and I think it was a really cool scene. I know some people had a little bit of beef about like some like the physics of like getting caught in spider webs and then like people falling, and like there's a scene where he like cuts, I forget who, out of like a spider web, and they fall for like ever and they don't take any damage. So I know there's a little bit of beef there amongst fans, but I think it was just fun. Yeah.
yeah, and I also like that Bilbo uses his smarts and he realizes that these spiders are really gluttonous. Where he kind of like, I think he like throws a rock or a branch, and they like hear that and they just rush off because they're like, oh, hey,
Yeah.
more food, maybe more food. Let's go get more food. But one of my favorite scenes, Manny, in the whole trilogy of Hobbit films is here, and it's when Bilbo loses the ring for a second, confronts a small spider which looks straight out of Kong's Skull Island,
Yep.
and he brutally murders this thing. And then he like has a moment where he like puts his hand over his mouth like he's gonna vomit, and it's kind of like the ring is taking hold of him because he
Yeah.
got it back and he was like mine, and then he was kind of like, oh my gosh, like I'm I'm turning into kind
Totally.
of a monster. I love it
Yeah.
so much. It's so
It's
good.
really good, and I mean, like, it's such a, I don't know. One of the things that I think this middle movie, The Desolation, does that is a little bit frustrating is like how over the plate it is. I think there's like a lot of I don't want to call it like fan service, but there's a lot of just kind of like setting the scene in a way that makes me feel like the movie thinks I'm dumb. It's like the movie like kind of over explaining things or over setting things up. And this is like, I think like kind of flirting with that, but it doesn't quite do it, which I think is great. But yeah, man, like it does this like we rarely get to see at least in The Hobbit like how the ring affects people in the beginning, right?
Yeah,
We saw Frodo's journey when he first got the ring to, spoilers at the end when the ring is destroyed. And we saw him go through all that pain and increasingly more weight and anguish. So it was cool to see that. Like, it's like, I don't know, this is a weird comparison to make, but it's like seeing somebody become addicted to drugs for the first time. You know what
sure.
I mean? Like, that's what it feels like. Like, it's like, oh my God, like this thing is changing them. And for
Yeah.
him to realize it himself was really intense. That was very cool.
Oh yeah, totally. And it's something that I think, because even though Bilbo's part of a group, he's not super close to any of the dwarves. He never really gets to that point. I wanted him to, like with Thorin, where Thorin might be like, hey, Bilbo, I've kind of noticed you've been changing a little,
Mm-hmm.
but none of them are going to say anything. So he has to realize it himself, especially without Gandalf being there. Because Gandalf, first off, probably wouldn't get caught up by spiders. Second off, if he did and get saved by Bilbo, he might be like, I don't know, he would probably notice. He'd be like, hey, like,
Yeah.
kind
He's
of
very
worried about
observant.
you.
Yep.
He's observing guy. He's an angel. Just figuratively and literally. But
And it
there's some,
is cool. I wanted to just mention like Bilbo's journey of being corrupted by the ring runs kind of parallel to Thorin's journey being,
yeah,
kind of corrupted by power and the Arkenstone and like the meaning of what it what it means to be like the ruler. And so like they kind of run parallel, and they're always kind of like jockeying for like who's going to be more corrupt this time kind of thing. And this is one of the first kind of glimpses into that.
Oh, totally. I always thought like power and greed, and like that was kind of like between Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. That was kind of one of the big like points of it all, was to say like, it's not everything, but there are people who are easily corrupted by it, and some people who takes a little bit longer, but eventually it'll seep its way through.
Yeah.
But you were talking about how like you kind of like that moment with Bilbo, it kind of feels like the movie's playing down to you, like it's almost, or like saying like it's hey, remember, it's Lord of the Rings. If that moment didn't do it, it's probably when Legolas shows up and is right in your face, and it's like, remember, Legolas, like he's back.
Like, hey, it's me. I'm a little older, but we're gonna use the computer to not make it seem like that. Yeah, there's a couple scenes I think when Gloin shows up as well, and there's like a conversation, and he's like, "Yeah, my lad, Gimli," and it's like, okay, I get it. Like, you didn't even have, we know who Gloin is. Come on, But yeah, I mean, when Legolas shows up, you're like, okay, cool, I get it.
Which is funny because like I think this whole trilogy, they kind of like are like, what if Legolas was kind of the jerk that he never truly fully was back in like Fellowship? In Fellowship, he has like one eye roll towards Gimli, and that for the most part is it. But they're like,
Yep.
what if he was as racist as Gimli was in Lord of the Rings? And it was just like, he sees dwarves and he's like, these guys suck, we should probably kill them too. And I just think it's so funny. But you're right, that whole like, he sees the little picture of Gimli and he's like, ugh, just disgusting. It's like,
right.
It's like Legolas,
But it's so funny too, because like as fans, like I want to be clear that I at least am aware of how selfish we are as Tolkien fans. We're like, give me more Lord of the Rings, and then they make a reference. We're like, ew, that was gross. Why you think I'm dumb? Like, so like I totally get it. Like we want it, and then when we get it, we're mad at it. So like it's all foolishness. But
yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're never happy. We're hypocrites.
Right.
But we love it. We love it and hate it. No, when they said Legolas was going to be in this one, I was like, that makes sense. I get it.
Right.
Not originally. But then again, the dwarves weren't fleshed out the way that they are originally. Right. So they've made some changes, and I think it helps, especially in the second movie, to bring somebody back like that people know. And then they can kind of, that'll help flesh out some of the stuff with Thranduil, and then the add-on or the addition of Tauriel, who is brand new to this whole thing. And I kind of feel bad for her. But I forget the actress's name. I feel so bad about this.
Evangeline
Lilly. Yes, thank you. I should know this. Evangeline Lilly.
Wasp, right, in Marvel movies.
Yes. So the funny thing about Evangeline Lilly, and I've seen this in some of the interviews, is she's like, all right, I went in, and they're like, you're going to play Tauriel. She's a brand new character. She's never been in this stuff before. And she's like, great, this is wonderful. And then she's like, one thing, just please, please, please don't put me in a love triangle. And they're like, we wouldn't dream of it. Wouldn't do it. Never going to do it.
Don't even worry about it. You're not going to be in a triangle.
And then they're like, she said they call me
triangle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're like, all right, we're doing reshoots. And they're like, it's not a big thing. It's not a big thing. But we thought it'd be fun if like Legolas loved you and you loved Keely. It's like, and I get it because they want to add some sort of tension or romance, which I think they're trying to strike at something that Two Towers did really well, is that like Aragorn was in love with Arwen, and that romance permeated throughout all the films, even though they weren't physically nearby. Right. I thought that was so cool. And that is something that people don't think about when they think of Lord of the Rings. They don't think of like this kind of great romance that's kind of going throughout all of it. And that is not present in The Hobbit ever, as far as the book is concerned. It's not like Bilbo's like, oh, and he fell in love with an elf, maiden, and there's something there.
Yeah, totally.
So I get why they did it. I understand why people were frustrated by it. But I do think Legolas and Tauriel, and in these movies especially, the elves are almost unmatched. Like unless you watch the extended edition stuff of the Battle of the Five Army and the dwarves who actually fight the elves in a decent way, the elves are just like next level. Because like when you saw Legolas back in the original trilogy, he'd do a couple things once in a while, but they weren't like so far out of left field. In this stuff, he is almost unstoppable. Like anything he thinks he can do. Yeah, which it can be good, but there's like moments where I'm like, okay, all right, I'm never worried about you, Legolas. Like nothing can ever hurt you, ever.
Like skateboarding a shield down a set of stairs, we're like, that makes sense. Like I understand it. It's an efficient way to get down the stairs. Like it makes sense. in the moment. But yeah, there's definitely a couple times where like he just did a triple backflip and then landed on his hands and
Yeah,
he's fine,
yeah,
so it does get a little bit silly.
yeah. Well, and then we get to enter into meet Lee Pace playing Thranduil, the kind of the king of the elves in Mirkwood, and that kind of setup. And I gotta, man, I'll love it with you, Manny. I'm impressed at how different but also similar they make all the Elven kingdoms, because you have Lothlorien, you got Rivendell, and you also have like Mirkwood or whatever, the king of the Greenwood. How cool that place is, and it reminds me of the other places, but it's its own thing. It's like this kind of
Totally.
tree network in a giant cave, it feels like, almost.
Yeah.
And he does a great job, even though I'm a little confused by this. I think he's constantly using magic to kind of cover up dragon fire that maybe he got on his face a long time ago,
Yeah.
which they kind of hint at a little bit. But I really
Right.
like his performance. I think he's pretty cool, and him being Legolas's dad, I think that's kind of fun. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know. I think the whole Elven section of this film is pretty interesting. How about you? What do you feel?
Agreed. No, I think it's really cool. And again, like to your point about them being of the same race but having their different sort of vibes, if you will, I think
Hmm.
it's really cool. And it's, I mean, it's true in reality. If you look at Asian cultures, if you look at Latin American cultures, like you look at Mexico compared to Ecuador, they speak the same language and they eat some of the same foods, but like the way they built their cities and their dialect and their style are completely different. And so I think it's a really cool reflection of reality in a completely fantastical world, which adds again to that world building. It's like, yeah, this is a place, like I totally get it why elves would be different but similar in a handful of ways. So I think it's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a great point. I was just thinking about that. I was like thinking all the differences between like my beloved Japan and like Chinese, like as far as like
Yeah.
even the like how they build a pagoda or the kanji they
Right.
use and how it's almost like it's similar but different. It's
Yep.
that's you're totally right. It just makes it more believable. And bringing in Lee Pace to play Thranduil, who is kind of like this, he's like a pretty angry version of Elrond, who really wants some gems, baby. He wants his his
Yeah.
starlight gems. He's like, here's the deal. I'm happy to back you in this whole thing, Thorin, but you're gonna have to give me what I'm due. And Thorin still has this kind of grudge against, Thranduil and the elves for not helping, a long time ago when Smaug originally attacked. So you
Yep.
get it right there. And Thorin, it's funny because like Thorin is just like standing before him. Thorin thinks of himself kind of as a king almost, but he's just kind of he has nothing to his name right now, and he's kind of
Right.
bartering with things that he doesn't have. He's
Yeah.
like, when I become the king, you're gonna get this and this.
You know what it
Sure.
reminds me of, and this is a weird one, but I recently saw the Hateful Eight, and I know your thoughts about Quentin Tarantino, but there is that sheriff played by, I forget his name, but I do love him. He's that when Samuel L. Jackson and other man whose name I'm forgetting are on their way to the haberdashery, they come across this guy in the blizzard, and he's like,
Mhm.
I promise I am the sheriff. When I get to town, they'll put a star on my chest, and you have to help me out. I'll reward you when we get to town. I promise I'm the sheriff, and I do have a star. And it's like a similar thing where like Thorin is like, look, I promise I'm the king. I'm going to get this stone. I'm going to have lots of riches. It's going to be super cool. And like, I'll give you whatever you want, but like, trust me, I'm a king, even though I have no proof, you know?
Oh yeah, totally. I was trying to think of if you were talking about Kurt Russell or somebody else who was with him in that
Kurt
movie.
Russell. So
I
Kurt Russell was in the carriage with Samuel L. Jackson,
gotcha.
and yeah, I forget the other guy's name. He's got really prominent teeth, and I
Oh, you're
don't
talking
remember.
about Walter Goggins.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah,
Yes, I've seen
he
that
plays
movie.
that sheriff, and he's like, if you leave me out here, I'll die, and then you'll be charged with murdering the sheriff, and I promise I'm the sheriff. So it's just like a funny, like I would never compare those two films,
I
but
love
like
it.
they both stand out for that exact, very specific
Dude,
reason.
for sure. Yeah. Well, and then like you get this kind of whole thing where they're locked up in this place after that kind of it's I guess the it kind of breaks down like the negotiations break down a bit as they often do, especially with a dwarf. Hashtag frumpy dummies. But it happens. And for some
Yeah.
odd reason in the book, I remember this so well, but I remember the whole barrel sequence which we're coming up to.
Yep.
And I remember thinking like, oh man, like Bilbo at this point, because The Hobbit was written before Lord of the Rings, basically he had this get out of jail free card constantly,
Right.
which was the ring, which allows him to, free all the dwarves from the spiders, free all the dwarves from this prison, and put them in barrels and like sneak out. And I love that whole like kind of like he is becoming the burglar, but just because he found like this invisible
Right.
granting ring. Like it's like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, like that's so
Totally.
cool. And
He's like the guy that like always has a guy that can help out
yeah,
with the thing. But like he's the guy. Then the ring is the guy. You know
yeah,
what I mean? They're like, hey, we've been trapped by a bunch of spiders, and Bill's like, I know a guy. His name is the ring. And
yeah.
they're like, we're trapped in this prison. He's like, don't worry, I know a guy who's really good with prisons. His name is also the ring. So like he does become this trump card, but I think I can totally see how or why a lot of people will be like, well, that takes the tension out, and we know he's going to get by, and we know he's going to escape death. But I think the fun part is him figuring out how to best utilize the ring, right?
Mhm.
Like, what is it like when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So like when he has the ring, I don't know, whatever the analogy is there, but like he has this power, and the fun tension, the fun part of the journey is him figuring out how best to use it, while knowing that it's corrupting him. So it's like this cool, it's this like this jockeying for position in terms of what's the prominent power. Like, is Bilbo using the ring or is the ring using him? Which I think is super fun.
It's like 10 or 15 years ago in video games when they had like a good and evil like meter, and like they're like,
Yep,
well, if you do more of this stuff, you're gonna be more evil. It was like in Fable, and
totally.
I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna do it. And so it's
Right,
like that's what
right.
Bilbo kept doing. But you're right, and I also like the fact that like we do see him have to kind of scope out the place. He finds some drunk elves, which is like really like rare to come by because I think they can
Super
hold their
rare.
liquor.
Yeah,
But his whole kind of crazy plan, and like he's won Thorin over, so that means by default he's won the other dwarfs over, even if they think he's nuts, because Thorin's like, just
right.
listen to him, like we gotta do this.
Yeah.
And then we get into the barrel sequence, which I would imagine shooting this was very painful and horrible. And from some of the stuff I've seen behind the scenes, it looks like they like erected this gigantic like river section thing.
Yeah.
Like it's
It's
in
like a
really
theme park
intense.
ride. It was wild. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, you know what? That was probably like really fun for the first like minute or two. Like, but
Yeah.
they're like, all right, get in a barrel. You're going over rapids. Orcs are shooting at you. Orcs are shooting at you. They're attacking on all sides. Elves are here too, and it's like, like
Right.
it's like try to
They're like,
survive.
okay, take 12. Orcs are shooting at you. Orcs are shooting at you. Come
Yeah.
on. All right, let's go. It's like, okay, I'm a little tired of these barrels.
Well, I wonder if it's a little bit like the end of the first movie, where, or before they get to Rivendell, and they were just told to run, and they had to
Yeah.
run for like a whole day or two, and it was just like, we'll get there's something out of here that's gonna be good. It's like you guys are running towards something. Uh,
Yeah,
but
totally.
that whole sequence, I enjoy it, even though it starts to show the difference, I think, between more so between Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, is that The Hobbit
100%.
is, again, as we talked about probably last time, it's a bit more cartoony. It's a bit
Mm,
more like your level of disbelief, I think it needs to be a little bit higher, because
yeah.
some of the characters start to do things where you're like, I didn't know you could do that, and I don't think they knew they
Right.
could do that. Like Bomber, who turns into just like a one man wrecking crew for just a few
Yeah.
seconds. A hilarious moment, but when you watch it later on, you start to be like, okay,
You're like,
yeah,
that's not how bodies work, but sure.
yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
fine.
Yeah. And then like Legolas shows up and he starts like jumping on the tops of dwarfs' heads, and you're like, this guy, is there anything he can't do? And he's like he's like standing on one leg, and he'll do like a shot, and you're like, that was
Yeah.
incredible. You're like, you
Yeah.
should go fight every army. You could
Like
win.
just by yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, you'll do it.
And I think that's somewhat by design. The Hobbit was written, I don't know if intentionally, but it is a little bit more kid friendly. It's a little bit more fun loving. It's not the dark, painful story of somebody slowly being corrupted and the journey to the heart of darkness, so to speak, right? So, I think like knowing that, I think is helpful. So I'm sure there were a lot of fans who maybe didn't read The Hobbit, but maybe did read the trilogy or didn't read any and are coming out of the trilogy and they're like, I want that dark brooding tale.
yeah.
And it probably catches a lot of people by surprise, but I think it is helpful to remember, like, okay, this is kind of the setup in terms of like chronology, and it feels very, from the very start of the literature, it feels more kind of like family friendly, if you will.
Oh, totally. And it could easily have descended into that other thing. I'm sure they thought about that a few times. They're probably like, well, we could do this, but if we're going to try to make this fully realistic, then there's stuff we just can't do. There's things like we can't have Legolas be like his most powerful self ever, if he's kind of like limited to sliding down a shield down a hill maybe once. Like it's not going to happen. There aren't stairs out here. But I do like how that fight does start off, because it's like they almost get out. the elves shut them in, and then Bolg shows up. I think it's, or so it's Azog at that point. I don't think Bolg's shown up yet.
Yeah.
But they're showing up. The orcs are showing up, and then there's kind of like this three-way war going on as the dwarves are pretty much just like, we just want to get out of here. Like, we don't want to be part of this. Like,
Yeah.
we want to leave. And like we said, like, let's get his moments. A few elves get their moments, and then Keely gets shot with that. They call it a black arrow. It kind of has the same vibe a little bit as like a Morgul blade, kind of,
Yeah.
sorta. I don't know if you got that too.
Yeah, definitely. I think there is like an inherent like one of the cool things about like Tolkien's world is that like not just creatures and like animate objects can be good or evil, but inanimate objects like swords or arrows or rings can have this have character, and so they're sort of modified, which I think is super cool. And again, like somewhat of an accurate depiction of reality. There's like poison dart arrows or whatever. So but like, you know, throwing in a dash of like magic, right? Like the black arrow, ooh, where does that come from, kind of thing. It definitely feels very similar to the Morgul blade, and I'm sure I don't necessarily know it, but I'm sure somewhere in the literature it's like black arrows are from the law whatever land, and they come from so because of their desire to so and so. Like I'm sure there's a story there, you know, which adds to the world for sure.
Oh, Manny, one of my favorite things about you is you're one of the biggest fans of this stuff that I've ever met, but you still have like this sensibility about you that like if you don't know something, you're not gonna like, well, I looked it up, and the Black Arrow, his name was Frank, and Frank had a family of 4, like, you know, something like that. It's great. I love it. But yeah, I think it could be. I might be wrong about this, and Bolg might have switched out by this point. There's a moment when Azog calls out for Bolg back at Dol Guldur, and I love it so much, and I don't know if that's happened already. Anyway, so our gentlemen have flown the coop, as it were. They're fleeing the scene, and then they run into another man. Everybody's got a bow and arrow in this episode, but then we run into Luke Evans playing Bard the Bowman, or just Bard as most people call him, and kind of barter their way into Lake Town, which for me is the most Fable thing out of this whole thing. If anybody played Fable back in the day, Lake Town is like a town in Fable. Like, it feels very much like it came out of like, and I mean that in the best, most loving way possible. Like, it feels very like a British town, and again, maybe kind of Harry Potterish, but it's like some of the buildings are kind of crooked, and they live on the lake because nobody wants to live near the mountain anymore in the beautiful town of Dale. And they get into this, and then it gets like, I don't know, out of any of the movies, for the most part, maybe Two Towers is a little bit like this too. It's a little bit political. There's like this kind of like, they've got the master of the town, who's kind of like a corrupted Theoden, and then he has his own version of Grima Wormtongue, who's not nearly as interesting, and not cool at all. Not that Grima's great, but like Grima's got some, like, he's an interesting guy.
Yeah, he's compelling, for sure.
But man, Lake Town, and there's a lot going on. I love that it feels like a decrepit version of Venice. There's like, we built it and we're kind of just trying to live our lives. How do you feel about Lake Town?
I think it's really cool, and it does feel like, at least in the cinema version, it feels very like fairy tale-esque. Like it does feel like a Harry Potter. It does feel like that kind of like almost whimsical in a way, and it's like kind of dark and grungy and gross, but like even the naming conventions, like Tolkien is so obsessed with naming things, and we'll get into that more when we talk about Smaug, but it's like, I don't know, it's a town on a lake, Lake Town, sure. Like, it's very whimsical, you know what I mean? So like, it does have that like very lived in kind of, again, adding to the world. Like if Bree was built on a lake, like that, it has that same vibe.
Totally.
Which I was like super into, you know?
Yeah, it's practical. It's just like, well, what are we going to call this place after the dragon destroyed it? I don't know. It's Lake Town. I don't care.
Sure.
Like, it's just like, is anybody happy living here? No. Who's in charge? That guy. Why? He is. Okay. Yeah. Like, it's like, that's how it is.
It's a living, another day in Lake Town.
Yeah, totally. And I do like the fact that the dwarves had to kind of sneak into Lake Town, but then later on you find out that while Bard is helping them, it gets to a point where they almost could have strolled into Lake Town if they would have been able to confront the master and say like, hey, we're from Erebor, we're going to go reclaim our gold keep, and we're going to send the riches will be paid onto you. Again, Thorin making, like, in this movie is a lot of like, I'll pay up on this, I promise.
As soon as I hit it big, just if you could loan me some space, you know.
It'd be
Yeah.
great. And I just so funny because there's this kind of like cloak and dagger of like we can't let them know that the dwarves are here, and then finally they get found out and they're just like heralded as heroes, and then Bard's like, wait a sec, maybe it was a bad idea because like was it his grandfather, right? I
Yep.
think that's
Yep.
who it was. Who tried to kill Smaug way back in the day. I forget if it was like 100 years or how many years it's been,
Yeah, I don't remember
something
either.
like
A
that.
long time.
But there a lot of it comes down, and there's a lot of, again, like in the original trilogy, a lot of hatred towards men in this
Right.
film, where it's like, well, if like if your grandfather had a true aim that day, we wouldn't have this problem. He would have killed that dragon, and I'd have been like, well, you dwarves, don't even get me started.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah.
Bard's like, wait. If the dwarves go back to Erebor, they're probably going to wake up the dragon. And guess what that dragon is going to do? It's probably going to kill all of them, and then it's going to come kill all of us. And everybody's
Right.
like, it's not a big deal. Don't even worry about it. We're gonna be rich.
Yep.
And then they get like sent off, except a few kind of hang out because Keeley was injured, and
Right.
he's there. I think it's Keeley, Bofer, Oin, and Feely, because Feely's like
Yep.
next in line under Thorin, and
Right.
Thorin's like, you gotta come, and he's like, I'm not leaving my brother, dude. And he's
Yep.
like, okay, well, stay here then, whatever. Um,
Right.
but yeah, and again, another fracturing of this group, which I think is probably good because it does allow us to like know some of these characters a little bit more. They'll
Yeah.
run together if you don't do this.
Totally.
But then there's kind of that group that stays, group that goes. Up finally to the Lonely Mountain, which is like, oh my gosh, finally we're here. It's like that's how I felt when we got to Mount Doom at the end of trilogy. I was like, oh my gosh, like
Yeah, and like the first Hobbit film, like I heard somebody refer to it as like, okay, let's go, and it was like kind of like that was the whole movie was them being like, let's go. Like it really should be called like planning an unexpected journey, like that. Like it was just a lot of setup, and so this finally, I don't want to say we get the payoff, but we finally get like just out the door. Like we get to the place they're trying to go and we get to that conflict they're really trying to get to. So I totally agree. When they got to the Lonely Mountain, I was like, oh, thank God.
Yeah, well, and they finally get up to the wall and they kind of wait
Yeah.
a little bit, and then they're just kind of like they give up pretty quickly. It seems like,
Yeah.
which I'm like, Thorin, guys, take a minute, take a breath, everybody.
Yeah.
And thankfully Bilbo's there, and he's a little more intelligent, and they have this whole moment where they almost drop the key, and it would have been the worst, and they finally get
Right.
in. And this is the moment where I think everybody who signed up, even for Unexpected Journey, this is what they're waiting for. Because you get to this point where it's like, Bilbo, up until this time, he signed that contract back at Bag End, where it's like he's worried about incineration, evisceration, or laceration, or something like that. But
Yeah.
now it's finally a reality, because they're like, hey, Bilbo, it's not a big deal, but we figured that you're pretty sneaky. You go on in first, check and make sure if there's a dragon about, and then come back and tell us if there's a dragon about. Because if there is,
Right.
probably won't go in there. But if there isn't, we're going in for sure.
Let us know. Yeah.
And I like that whole moment where it's Bilbo talking with Balin, and he's kind of like, oh, I'm impressed by you, Bilbo. I didn't think you could do this type of thing. And Bilbo has this moment where he's like, oh yeah, well, I'll go do this, and then he kind of turns around and Balin's like gone. Balin's like, yep, see ya. Like all the dwarves kind of looked into Erebor, and they're like, these are the walls, we know. And they're like, but you go first.
Yeah.
Like,
Totally. It felt like a boxing match where the trainer's like, you're gonna do great, and he's like massaging his shoulders. He's like, get out there, you're good, you're the best. And then he goes and he's like, he's gonna get beat up.
yeah,
Oh my God.
yeah, he's gonna get
So
destroyed. You're
Yeah.
like, oh
Yeah.
no. Yeah, I love that though. When we finally get back to Erebor, you see, and you've seen this before, but like you really get a feeling for the scope and the scale, and you're like, how much treasure can one like place hold?
Yeah.
Because it feels almost infinite. You're like, it's just mountains of gold everywhere.
Yeah,
And you're like,
exactly.
and you have no idea because it's so much. A dragon could be in here. Two dragons could be in here. I have no idea. And so they're
Yeah.
like, oh, and Bilbo, don't go and find this thing. It's the Arkenstone. You'll know it when you see it. Which I always hate when people say that, because I'm like, wait, what is it? What do you mean?
What does
Like,
that mean?
Yeah.
How will I know? Will I know?
Yeah.
If you're telling me I will, but I'm not sure.
Well, he could have, even without Smog in there, he would have been there maybe like a week or two without. He'd be like, I have no idea where am I even looking? I don't even know where to
Weeks.
start.
I'm very tired.
But what do you think of Erebor now after we saw it in its heyday? The beginning of Unexpected Journey.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. I think what it does is again, it speaks to like the evolution, and it speaks to that time change, and it speaks to like events, right?
Yeah.
And so there are so many major events, whether it's like the Battle of blah 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 or the Desolation of so in place, like those kinds of moments in Tolkien's stories. And so to have that sense of like, okay, this place used to be prosperous, it used to be bustling, it used to be lived in, and now it's the opposite of all those things, and that I think gives a lot of impact to the impending danger that might be inside, right? So I think what it does is, I guess, like a little bit of foreshadowing for sure, but it kind of sets the stakes, right? Because Bilbo's going to go in there to probably find a dragon and like look what the dragon is capable of, kind of thing. So I think it sets that stakes really well.
You said it so well, because I keep thinking, like, before I saw this, I was not as familiar with the word desolation, and when they show like Dale that has been destroyed and the desolation it has caused, that's like the namesake of this particular film. And so you make a really good point there of like what could portend to come. They're like, well, the dragon's wrath has been wrought once before. If it's done again, like, I don't think anybody's ever going to live anywhere near here ever again. Like, and we get such great performances here. But there's one moment here from, again, Martin Freeman just killing it just this whole time. He's searching around, and there's a moment where he, I think, starts to realize that Smaug is starting to raise up out of the gold. And he just decides to crouch down on like one knee, and he puts like his hand like over his chin, kind of, and he's like, I'm just not gonna do anything. I'm not gonna move. Right. Like, not a big deal. Like, just doing that whole like Hobbit, I don't want to be seen thing. I love it. I think it's so good. Like, I don't know how you...
And like the portrayal of Bilbo by him is just so good. And Ian, I'm forgetting his name, old Bilbo.
You're talking about Ian Holm.
Ian Holm.
Yeah.
Does a marvelous job. I think he's fantastic. But Freeman's, like, his ability to embody the whimsy, the curiosity, the like determination, like Bilbo is such a nuanced character, and I think a lot of people don't really always catch that. I think they kind of he gets a little shortchanged, and so I think Freeman's ability to portray all of those different nuances, often at the same time, is amazing. It's incredible, and this is like a perfect moment for that. Yeah.
Oh, and you nailed it perfectly. And all this makes me think of is, I don't know why the third movie didn't have this, but it's Bilbo once again having a conversation. It's like Riddles of the Dark Part 2, but with a much larger antagonist who has all the cards, as it were. Whereas Gollum was like, you know what? If this really came down to it, we're not really sure who's going to take the day here. But with Smaug, it's not really a question. It's not like, well, Bilbo, if he... It's like, no. Like, this could be a one and done.
Yeah.
And you finally see him in all of his glory. I think for some odd reason in my mind, I don't know why this is, but maybe it's because of like the original like cartoon. I always pictured Smaug as being like more robustly red, but they played it a little more muted, a little more realistic. I think it works great. And I love that, like, his eye is almost like an eye of Sauron, but they're like, well, we can't make it exactly the same, so we got to give it like a little, like, there's a little bit difference. But that whole conversation between the two of them, and just a great performance by Benedict Cumberbatch, just barrel rider, like, stuff like that. It's so good, man. It's so good.
Really good. And it's finally like, this feels like a huge payoff for people who are watching the Hobbit trilogy, because we're seeing the dragon, we're seeing him, we see his face, we get his voice, we get his character. And Tolkien was so aggressively intent to give Smaug like a character and give him a voice and give him a name. And again, Tolkien's obsessed with names and their meanings and their impact. And so I think one of the most obvious inspirations of The Hobbit and largely of a lot of Tolkien's work is Beowulf, right? And so there's all these parallels you can make to the dragon Beowulf and Smaug and several other dragons in Tolkien's work. But I do want to read a little bit from this book.
Yes,
and
please.
Again, this is The Dark Powers of Tolkien by David Day. Let's see. This is in both tales, referring to Beowulf and the Hobbit. I'm sorry. In Tolkien's tale, the thief is the Hobbit, Bilbo Baggins. In the ancient poem of Beowulf, a thief encounters a dragon's lair and steals a gold cup. In both tales, The theft of a gold cup awakens a sleeping dragon that emerges from his lair to lay waste to a nearby kingdom. The Hobbit is essentially Beowulf, the Beowulf dragon story told from the point of view of the thief. There is, however, one problem with Beowulf's dragon. He is more the terrifying. More the terrifying embodiment of evil than an individual villain who happens to be a dragon. And one of the things that Tolkien really believed was that the issue with Beowulf's dragon is that the closer the reader gets to the dragon, the more the dragon recedes. The dragon doesn't even have a name in Beowulf. And so Tolkien was so adamant that you have to have this intimate relationship with the dragon. You need to like know it and learn it. And like you can't get any closer in this scene. Like Bilbo's right there in front of Smaug. And I want to read a little bit more. Far better than a large but nameless lizard like Beowulf's monster, Smaug, the greatest of calamities, carries the collective meaning of his name's composites in Old English: penetrating, inquiring, burrowing, worming into, and creeping through. And so I think those descriptors for Smaug are so amazing because they are exactly what makes him the vile, covetous creature that he is, right? And it's just I think it's so beautiful, like the way both the books and I would say even more so in the movies, because of that we're watching it, we're seeing it. You get so up close and personal with Smaug, and you hear his voice. And again, credit to Cumberbatch for like pouring himself into this voice and the movements. And like, yeah, man, like you can just feel the presence of Smaug, and I think it's just so cool, that scene, especially like the first real time where you get to see in full view. It's amazing.
Oh, totally. And it's funny that you bring up that information about his name, because as a kid growing up on Pokemon, I was thinking of like coughing and wheezing on Smaug, and
Right.
I was like, is that like, it's what comes after? It's like he's burned things, it's the smog afterwards, but there's way more to it than that, even though I think you could take it kind of however you want, and no matter what, here he is on display. And out of all of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogy stuff, we never get a character that's this big and also it has this much personality.
Right.
Like we don't get that. The closest we get is probably the Balrog, but the Balrog isn't like Gandalf, like how dare you come into the mines of Mordor.
Yeah. Like a verbal standoff,
yeah, exactly.
It feels so slimy. Like Smaug feels like the CEO of a corporation that's like ruining like natural resources. Like he just feels like the slimiest dude ever. And I just love how much that character is so it comes through so well.
And I think you talked about it a little bit before too, but Thorin later on, I believe in this movie, calls him a witless worm, and I've always loved the term worm. That's WYRM for dragon, and he feels like a worm. Like it's not like an actual little worm, but also kind of like there's this kind of weirdness to it, because like he's not like the proud, beautiful dragon you're gonna get in something more like Aragon. Or things like that. This is, like you said, he does feel slimy. Like his whole thing is like, I lay on a bed of gold, I sleep under a blanket of gold. I don't know if I've left this place in decades. I like to just lay in this stuff. I'm not going to spend it on anything. I don't need anything. I'm a big bad dragon. And that's like all there is to it.
I think the difference, and I might be wrong, so if somebody watching or listening knows this, tweet at Jimmy.
Yes.
I think the difference is dragons traditionally have 4 legs and worms have 2. I think because Smaug has the 2 legs and then his like wing hands.
Yeah, that's maybe it. Okay.
I think that's the difference, if I'm not mistaken.
I love it. That's so good to know. Okay, I believe it. I believe it already. It's like a wyvern rider in Warcraft versus like a griffin.
Totally.
That's great. Oh, that's so cool. But yeah, so Smaug, finally, we get this conversation. Pretty fun back and forth. It's not as intimate and maybe as emotional as the one with Gollum, but that's because I know Gollum so well. I didn't spend like a couple movies with Smaug hanging out with Frodo, and he was like, quick, Frodo, to the Black Gate.
Exactly.
Which would have been a totally different movie if they would have gotten Smaug on board. Like he landed in Rivendell, and he's like, I too will take the ring.
Yeah.
It would have been amazingly fast. But man, it's a great sequence, and then obviously it kind of has to come to a point where neither of them is going to win the day, really. Even though by maybe luck, chance, or fortune, we get Bilbo finding the Arkenstone, and he's like, I hope this is it. Because like if it were me, I'd be like, it was the shiniest thing I saw. A dragon tried to kill me, multiple
And they're like,
times.
You didn't even get the right thing. We said you would
Yeah,
know when you know." And it's like, I didn't know.
exactly. He's like, I'm not a
Yeah.
dwarf. He's like, how do you guys? I know this was a long time ago, but like it was hanging, it was above the throne. Could you give me a
Right.
color? Can you give me like a?
Yeah.
They're like, it's shiny and
They're like, "It's all
roundish.
the colors of the rainbow." It's like, this is not
Yeah,
helpful,
like
guys.
dang these frumpy dummies.
Yeah.
But I like that he does get out and he's kind of like, you know what, guys, like you're right. And they hear it, and like everybody hears it. Like like even in Lake Town, there I think you start to hear the rumbles and stuff, and it's like, oh no, like it's like
Yeah.
this isn't gonna go well. And I
Right.
love that like the acute senses of Smog, where before he can even see Bilbo, he's like, I can smell you, I can hear you, and
Right.
he's like, you stink of dwarf, but you're not a dwarf.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but he's
Well, it's
also
kind of funny because he has like he boasts about his amazing sense of smell, and then at some point later, like the dwarves are like kind of sneaking around, and he doesn't know they're there. So I'm like, come on, man! Like you, we're bragging about how good you can smell. What's the deal here,
you're
dude? You
totally
know?
right. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, yeah. But yeah, I just I don't know. He's a great character, and he
Mm.
does get a little. I think his introduction is so strong, but
Yeah.
then later on, when you get the whole like the dwarves are going to thwart him and kill him, it does make him look a bit of a fool, just
Yeah.
because of they needed a big action sequence at the end of this movie that nobody could possibly get hurt in.
Right.
So you
Right.
get that kind of that whole sequence where the dwarves are sneaking around. They're right underneath him, like you said, and he's kind
Yeah.
of going over top of them. And it is kind of freaky because they do some of those like far away shots where he'll kind of come around a corner and you see him, and he doesn't look big, but then he gets closer and you're like, oh my gosh, like imagine
You're
this
like,
thing
"This
stalking you. Yeah, you're like he's gonna kill us all. Uh, what did you think of that whole sequence? It feels very like Attack of the Clones Foundry sequence to me. Like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah. I
know,
think it's really cool. I think like it has this weird element of like who's the invader, and
uh,
I've been thinking a lot about like that theme. I've been just constantly playing Demon Souls, and there's a lot of that vibe in that game. It's like, am I the bad guy? Am I the invader here? Am I ruining people's homes? And so it just I don't want to say it begs the question, but it makes you think, right? It's like, well, okay, this gold first belonged to the dwarves, and then the dragon or the worm came in, and he's like, this is mine now, and he's been here for eons, and then now they're coming back, but like he's so familiar with the area, so it's this like cat and mouse game in a place that a lot of everybody who's involved is familiar with, and so it's like, whose domain are we in? It kind of it's like there's a fish out of water sense, even though that like it's I don't know, it kind of like belongs to everybody. Like Smog's been here for so long, it's kind of his turf, but it's also used to belong to them. But it's so tense because it does have this, the scale is there, like you were saying, how big he is, and it's this like weird cat and mouse game that I think differs really well from the scene with Bilbo, because that was like a cat and mouse of like wits and words, and this is a physical cat and mouse game where they're being stalked, right? And so, any kind of tension where it's like big thing, like stalking small thing, is like that's terrifying. The stakes are so big, and so I think it built some really really cool tension. I do think like to your point about making him kind of look like a fool, I agree there, and I think like that theme of like, ooh, the little people are outsmarting the big person, outstays its welcome just a touch, just a
sure.
tiny little bit, but otherwise, I think it's a really cool scene. Yeah.
And I wonder too if it's because of, like we said, the payoff with him, and people want to see him in action. They don't like, this is the first time I think, I don't know, it's not ever, but the first time in more modern films or more recent films where the main antagonist is actually a gigantic fire breathing dragon. He
Right.
doesn't like, his superpowers are thus, I mean, like he's his, what does he say? He's like my claws, or my like harpoons, and my teeth or
Yeah.
fangs or swords and all this stuff. He's a dragon.
Right.
And people want to see the dragon fight and do stuff. And if they
And do
didn't,
like dragon stuff.
exactly, yeah. And if he didn't do that here, what you get is him being like, you know what? You guys are big meanies, and I'm gonna go to Lake Town. I'm gonna show him what's up, like, and then they'd be like, you have to wait to the next movie to see him do any
Yeah.
dragon stuff. So
Exactly.
it's such a hard
Yeah.
position to be in. So I get why they throw that in, and I know there's like a lot of like maybe physics problems again with it
Right.
all, but you know what? I think it's still kind of fun. I like that their whole kind of goal is like, what if we could like we could get him in a big like lake of gold, and maybe that would work, and that would stop him. And it's like, it almost does, but
Yeah.
it doesn't.
And like I admittedly the first time I saw it, like visually made no sense to me. Like, so like he approaches this gigantic statue, and Thorne's doing his big stall speech. He's like, "Yeah, you guys you're bad, and are you guys ready yet? Yeah,
Yeah.
oh, we're gonna get you." And the dwarves are behind the statue, holding onto these chains, and you don't fully like really know what's going on. And then the big reveal, he's like, "I'm gonna go to Lake Town. I'm gonna go mess that place up." And then Thorne calls him back. He does the speech, and then the big reveal is they open the statue, and you realize it was a mold the whole time. It was like inside the gold was to fill the mold, and then it would harden, and you'd have a gigantic gold statue. And I think what's really cool is that they played on his weakness, which is his lust for power and his lust for gold and money and all those things and gems. And his greed is what you think will be his demise. But then, so like they open the mold, and you're looking at this gigantic gold statue, and I think that scene is amazing. You see this huge, and I was like, I've never seen that much gold in my life. Like,
Yeah.
huge, and it's super shiny, and it's like this big dwarf, and I forget who the statue is of, but it's very cool. And then like out of nowhere, the gold just starts like melting, and like admittedly the first time I saw it, I was like, what's happening? Like, is reality bending? Like,
Yeah.
what? And then I was like, oh, the gold wasn't hardened yet, I guess. Okay, but how long has it been in there? What's happening here? And like, I don't know. I'm not a smelter. I don't know how those physics work, but like it held its structure for like a good like almost minute, and then
Yeah.
suddenly it's this viscous liquid again. But that stuff aside, I think it's so cool. Like, it was so cool to see him go down in this lake of gold. It's like, oh my god, how ironic! His greed is drowning him. Um, and so the gold and you can stop me if I'm blowing through this too fast.
No, it's fine.
But the gold, rushes down, and it kind of engulfs him, and he's like kind of in this like gigantic bathtub filled with liquid gold.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like what feels like 5 minutes of silence, but like the
Yeah.
gold has now covered him. He's under the surface of this gold, and the surface of the gold is still. There's not a ripple in the water. And in reality, it's probably like 6 seconds of silence. But you're like, is he dead? Like, this was their big plan. Did it work? Oh my god! And then you see him burst from the surface, and he's like screaming. And again, like Cumberbatch, like nailed. The gold was probably hot, I assume.
Yeah.
So like that probably wasn't great, and like he was like kind of probably suffocating a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But his like scream and his anger, and I think he says something along the lines of like, "I'll show you what revenge is," or something like that. Because Thorin is like, "We will have our revenge,"
Mm-hmm.
and just the visuals of seeing a dragon completely covered in liquid gold is about the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. Like,
It is pretty
I
cool.
thought it was super cool. Yeah, awesome scene.
Well,
physics aside, but very cool.
Well, totally. And I think like if you go back with the context of that in mind, you realize that like Thorin the whole time has been like doing what he wants to do, which is lead, but he's also doing the things that dwarves do. And that's like they make stuff. And that's why he's like, everybody, you guys, we all have jobs here to do. We got to do this together. And it's a tricky plan because you're right. The first time you do see that gold statue start to burst, you're like, what's happening? Like
I thought that was solid. No?
Yeah, and it's weird. I think, again, because they're limited to how the book works and because that conflict needs to end a certain way, it's weird that he doesn't just like turn on the dwarves and he's like, I'm going to kill all of you now. He's like, you know what? I'm going to Lake Town. I'll show you what's what. And you're like, I kind of wish in a way they would have, and I don't think it's in the movie, and it might be in the extended edition, but if Smaug were to have figured out like that feeling Keely were there. And you'd been like, you know what? I'm going to kill your family, and then I'm going to kill you. And then you're going to die knowing that there are no more dwarves who are going to rule in Erebor. Like, that would have made maybe more sense as opposed to him just being like, Lake Town, they sent you here, didn't they? Like, he kind of just goes insane. Maybe the gold is in his head, and he's like, I can't even think right now.
There is a little conversation with Smaug and Bilbo right before that whole sequence takes place where Smaug is like running out the door, and Bilbo says like, "No, stop! Like, this isn't their fight. Like, they weren't."
Oh yeah, you're right.
Basically. And then Smaug kind of turns around and he's like, "Oh, you care about these people. You care about this place." And so like that sets that emotional tension, but at the same time, is like, I don't know. It feels a little bit hollow. And again, like they do have to stick to the literature, of course, but it does feel like, I don't know. He's like, there's a scene. I'm making all these weird comparisons.
I
There's a
love it.
scene in a Family Guy episode where
Yes.
Mr. Griff, not Mr. Griff, yeah, the dad, Lois's dad, Mr. Griffin. I don't know,
Yeah.
not Mr. Griffin,
No.
Mr. whatever the mom's name is.
Lois's
It's
dad.
her Lois's dad. He gets like a bulldozer and he's trying to like get back at Peter for doing something, and he's like, hey, do you like that bench? And Peter's like, yeah, I guess it's a good bench, and he destroys it, and he's like, ha, you loved that thing. Like that's what it feels
Sure.
like Smaug is being like, oh, you like Lake Town, I'm gonna go ruin Lake Town because you like that thing. And it's like, well, yes, but then like, yes, you'll kill a bunch of people and stuff, but yeah, I don't know, it's this weird like, why doesn't he just turn around, breathe fire on everybody?
Yeah, exactly. Just done. Maybe he couldn't right there, and he's like, I have to go outside to shake off my little gold husk.
Mhm.
You know, got to get in the night air. They should have
It's
just
so
flash
awesome.
frozen that gold. Would have been over. That's all I'm saying. The dwarves, they were this close to victory. Maybe they didn't have like water pipes into this
Right? They
main
could have just
room.
told it. Yeah, and they
It's
have
like
a cool gold dragon
it's
statue.
like
Yeah.
but it sets up like a really weird sequence that a lot of people have told me they don't like in Battle of the Five Armies that we'll probably talk about someday. But meantime though, as all this crazy stuff's happening, we have some stuff going down in Lake Town because the
Right.
orcs are playing. They're doing their best ninja part to sneak around Lake Town, and they're gonna go assassinate some dwarves. But thank goodness
Yep.
Tariel shows up, and there's like this kind of extended, fight scene that's going on there. Tariel saves Keely from his black arrow because she's doing her Arwen from Fellowship, impersonation. She's an elf.
Yep.
It's good. But then we get Legolas in his most drop down drag out fight I've ever seen him in. He does
Yep.
stuff in this fight that I've never thought an elf, let alone Legolas, would do.
Yeah.
But he goes 1-on-1 against Bolg, and he's got Orcrist now. And man, I think it's just for me. I can't not think of him just taking Bolg's face and smashing it repeatedly into like a wood, like, I don't know, pillar.
Some
But
kind of like bowl, yeah.
yeah, and that whole fight where he's icing these other orcs so quickly.
Yeah.
And they actually did a live action with some wire work. Him like Orlando Bloom running and jumping up onto that, like there's like a bridge, and he kind of puts both his feet on either side of the railing, and he like shoots
Yep.
somebody. And I was like, oh, like some of that stuff looks great. But
Yeah.
what do you think of that fight?
I think it's really I don't know, it does feel like the focus is a little bit scrambled to me. I think like again visually I think it's super cool, and they're obviously leaning so hard into like elves are magic people and
Yeah.
they defy all the laws of the world. Which like I think there's a couple scenes, and I don't remember if it was in this fight or in a previous one, where it's so clear that there was like some CGI stuff going on where
Mm,
I think Legolas' full body was rendered, and it shows, and I'm just like,
sure.
oh wow, that was jarring. But and I can't remember if it was in this scene or not, but yeah, I mean you're right, like he does kind of go, he kind of goes like prison rules on this guy, and like all of the like I don't know, elves have a lot of like valor and maybe not honor, but they have this like artistry about the way they fight. It's very elegant. And like Legolas like throws all of that out the window. He just goes insane. Which again, visually very, very cool, but it felt a little bit out of character, I think. And I think you know, um there's like a sense of again like the trilogy, the Fellowship trilogy fan of me being like that's not Legolas, but then you're reminded of like this is a different Legolas. This is
Hmm.
a younger Legolas who is he's not as worldly perhaps, and he's not as like well rounded. And like I think Tariel is kind of like his foil almost. She kind of retains a little bit of that like elven
Hmm.
stature and elven artistry in her combat, but again overall like I think you just need to accept the Hobbit, and especially this movie, because I think this is like one of the more combative movies, and Five Armies, of course, or the last one, definitely. But I think you just have to accept it for exactly what it is, and it's a disservice, I think, to make a lot of comparisons to the Fellowship trilogy. And so I think like in a vacuum, I think that scene is very cool, and
Yeah.
I think it's the side of characters we know that we hadn't seen before. So I think overall, I think I think it's pretty sweet. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting too because like it's so hard, like you say, as being fans of this stuff without constantly drawing those comparisons, but also trying to be like, all right, they're doing something new. This is different. And Bolg is one of them because he's a spawn of Azog, kind of like his son, maybe or maybe not. And he's got like
Yeah.
these like metal slats that are like like grafted into his skin, so he'll get hit with a sword and he'll be like okay. like kind of
Right.
thing. Like he takes a few hits where he'll just be like, ha, and he'll headbutt you. And I thought it was weird to have Azog be like your main dude, and then he has to kind of go off and do other stuff, which we're going to talk about here shortly, and kind of bring this other guy in to be like, all right, well, we're going to need to have Legolas have some sort of, you know, kind of rival, as it were, of the bad
Right.
guys.
Yep.
And you finally get this guy. I think he's fine. Like, you know,
Yep.
he's interesting enough. He's cool enough. He's kind of brutish. He's like a boss from a video game. I think he calls in some people at one point. Like he has
Yeah.
like little ads come in,
Yep.
because that's what you do. Especially if you find Legolas. You're lucky.
Yep.
You have to find a way to sap his arrow supply. Because if Legolas
Yeah.
had any arrows, you'd be dead, like just 5 times over.
Exactly.
You'd be
Yeah.
just like, yeah, they kind of like he runs off, and then Legolas is like, "How dare you?" And he's like, "I'm coming after."
Yep.
So it's kind of like they have their own little thing there, but that was worth mentioning because it's like that was kind of the big fight in Lake Town, even though it's a little more subtle compared to the bombastic nature what's going on in Erebor.
I think it mirrors also like Aragorn's kind of mini rivalry with Big Orc, whose name I'm forgetting.
Lurtz?
Lurtz, yeah, the Urkai. And so like it kind of has this and I think there's a lot of, again, I'm like, don't make comparisons, but here I'm making comparisons. You know, the movie does have a lot of tie-ins in it, and like I think you can look at Thorin and be like, well, that's just Dwarven Aragorn, and in so many ways, but you know, it does kind of mirror that rivalry that he had with Lurtz, and I think that's a cool thing. I think like setting up those like smaller, because again, the scale of what we're dealing with is a gigantic dragon covered in gold towards the town. So I think it was nice that it took the scope and it narrowed it down to the smaller, a little bit more digestible conflict. I think that's good.
Oh, totally. And I was going to make that comparison too, because great job. I was thinking like, well, if I do that here, I can't make the comparison in Battle of Five Armies where it's Thorin versus Azog, which is, again, it's like anytime anybody has a one-on-one fight with an orc leader, which doesn't happen a lot, especially in Lord of the Rings, that is like a one and done. Like, because most of the other ones, like even Gothmog, you see him in the extended, and they all just run past him. They're just like whoop whoop whoop, like exactly. They just rip him apart. But yeah, oh gosh, it's
really hard not to make those comparisons.
Yeah, I know, right? It's so hard. I
watch a boxing match or something, and I'm like, yeah, this is just like Aragorn and Lurtz, man. I'm telling you what. Like, it's hard to not like bring that into everything. So,
well, yeah, dude, especially there's that moment where Lurtz does headbutt Aragorn, and you're like, every time you see anybody headbutt anybody as an orc, you're like, oh, that's classic Lurtz.
He did the Lurtz, guys.
That's
like, why are you yelling?
Saruman taught him that one. He's like, what you want to do is grab the man and hit him in the head.
Shoulders.
Like, oh, Saruman, that's amazing. And the other thing I do want to talk about briefly here is Gandalf's little side quest, which I absolutely adore. I know it's kind of appendices, add-on stuff, but they needed to add more to this movie, because if you're going to make something with this kind of almost the Lord of the Rings name, you need to make it a long film, and you have to make it grand in scale. And also, his stuff is basically not only set up for Battle of the Five Armies, but really a setup for Lord of the Rings. And if you didn't know that, there's stuff in here that might feel a little bit like the Khan moment in Star Trek Into Darkness, where he goes up into the high fells and he has to seek out this weird tomb, and Radagast shows up, and it's like, oh, these things broke out of these tombs, and he's like, it's one of 9. If you didn't know what the ring wraiths were, you're probably like, why are there 9 of them? Like, what's happening?
Why not 10? What's happening, guys?
Yeah, but I love that, because the high fell stuff, it's like so dark and brooding. It feels a little more classic, like Lord of the Rings. I make the comparisons, Manny, I'm sorry. But I love that, like, it's Ian McKellen's little side quest, or I say Gandalf's little side quest, where it's just like, he's sneaking around, he might slide down a ramp. Like, that's like, before he gets really entrenched and involved at Dol Guldur, and he's like, you know what? Radagast, I know you went in there, you didn't die, good job. I'm going to go back in there. I'm going to purposefully do some call-outs. I'm going to walk around and be like, hey, evil is not welcome here. Everybody get out. Everybody, please, you can't go home, but you can't stay here, neither.
Yep.
And I do like that. And it is so weird to see an orc land a hit on Gandalf. Because Azog jumps out and is like, dunk. And it's like, I'm like, how did you do it? Like, wow, well done. Only one other one's gotten close, and he was on the high walls in Minas Tirith, and Pippin's like, nope. But yeah, what do you think of the high fells and the Dol Guldur stuff?
it does definitely have like a gravitas that the rest of the movie I think is like almost entirely lacking
Mm,
in. And when you said it feels a little bit more classic, it like I was like, man, I feel like there is like a school of thought, like there's like the Tolkien literature scholars, and then there's like the movie classicists,
that'd
and
be
then
me.
there's like the Hobbit enthusiasts, I guess, and everyone's like, man, screw those guys. Those Hobbit dudes don't know anything.
Yeah.
What barrels, you dorks? And so like it was just funny the way you
Uh,
phrased it. Yeah, it feels like classic Lord of the Rings. And like at this point, like it's been like 20 years since the Lord of the Rings, and so like it does feel like an old classic, at this point. But it does have that dark, like deeply, deeply evil, because like again, like the backdrop of all of this is the tension around the ring. It's the War of the Ring. It's Sauron. It's the Evil Eye. It's Mount Doom. But like here, we're just like it's like a guy and his rock and a dragon, and so it does kind of bring you back to like what's really going on, like what the real plot is here. And like you can almost look at the trilogy of The Hobbit as like a three-movie setup for the Fellowship trilogy. And so I think just like having that sense of like, yes, these are big stakes. There's Lake Town and Smaug, and everyone might die and stuff like that. But there's also something so much bigger, like end of the world type stuff, that's happening. And again, to have a character that we know and we're comfortable with, like Gandalf, very digestible, easy to get, like everyone loves the guy. To have him, be the sort of champion of that, he's the one that's bringing us back down to the tension of the ring. I think feels so good. And like that's the scene where he kind of, and I'm jumping a tiny bit ahead, but that's the scene where he kind of has like the big eye vision.
yes.
And feel you can definitely describe it a little better than I can, but like those, it's like yeah, those are the flavors I'm used to, like that deep evil. And so I thought it felt great. I think it was a really cool. I thought like and we haven't fully gone into it yet, but like what felt like a looping gif of the eye getting close. I was like, really? Like,
Yes.
you just put a looping GIF in front of us? Come on, man! Like that went on for far too long. Like I thought it was really cool. It's like, oh my god, you can see the outline of his body, and it's like the embodiment of the most highest evil in this whole world. But it's just like
Yep.
and I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. But again, like it's those flavors we're familiar with, it's the people we're familiar with, and that at its surface feels very good.
Oh yeah. Oh Manny, that's just so I will never look at that thing the same way again. I'll be like, oh, it's the gift section.
And they played a GIF. Come
Yeah,
on.
yeah, totally. And you bring up this really interesting point because you do have this side mission, but it is a big deal. And he does kind of run into a lot more than he can handle because at this point, and in the original Hobbit, I believe the way it was framed was that the necromancer at Dol Guldur was not supposed to be Sauron. He was a
Right.
guy, probably a regular man who got into some magic he shouldn't have. But this makes a little bit more logical sense to me, especially as a Lord of the Ring movie fan, as a
Right.
classicist or classicist or
Yeah.
whatever it is,
Exactly.
20 years on. But there's something that makes sense to me there and why he's chosen, why Sauron is this guy. But it's Gandalf against Azog and some of the orcs and the wargs and stuff, kind of. And he's kind of running
Right.
around. He's blowing stuff up. It's Gandalf unleashed. Like he doesn't have to worry about his buddies. He's like, I can blow stuff up if I want here. It's totally fine. Uh, but then he finally runs into Sauron, and it's an interesting interpretation because at first it is a little Balrog esque. You got Gandalf who's got this kind of light bubble around him, and Sauron is like darkness just trying to hit him from all these
Right.
different. It's like these kind of fingers, these tentacles, and then finally, he finally reveals himself and slams poor old Gandalf into the wall. And I feel like Gandalf, when he fights people like this, oftentimes he gets slammed against the thing, and he has to be like, ah, like his face is getting
Yeah,
pushed
he does
against
this
it.
like old, he does like this old man trying to fight like gravity thing, and he does like a
Yeah.
like he does like old, but still somehow like wise like yelp for help. Like he's like, oh, and yeah, man, that guy's bones, they must hurt,
Oh,
just old
totally.
bones.
And I like that he says it because, like, if some people weren't sure at that point, he's like, "Oh, he's like Sauron," and again, Sauron. Maybe he made this fatal mistake that he taught Saruman, which is like, let's just put Gandalf in a place he can't be a problem. It's like I don't know why you can't just kill him right there, or maybe you couldn't kill him. There's something about it where they're like, let's throw him in a little cage so he can act as a point of view for everybody else to watch. It's like,
Exactly.
why didn't you? You should probably
You
deal
can
with
just get
that.
rid of
Yeah,
Yeah.
get rid of him right now.
Yeah.
But I think that's pretty cool. I do like, and again, right as I see the Sauron stuff, and you're right, they kind of they finally get the flames emit, and it's like the shadow of him. How amazing would it have been to get physical form Sauron? And I get why they didn't do it, but like
Yeah.
I just ever since Fellowship, they've even I think Jackson has even said, yeah, in my mind he was in a physical form in the Tower of Barad-dûr. I just would love to see that 9 foot tall armor again. And
Yeah.
again, that's if you guys ever want to do this, look up like deleted scenes from Return of the King where they opted Sauron out for a troll and they put a troll in there to fight Aragorn at the end.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, like it would
Would
have
have
been
been
so
so
cool.
cool. And again, it's that intimacy that Tolkien was so about, you know
Yeah,
what I mean? Like the intimacy with Smaug, the intimacy with evil.
yeah,
I think it's so fascinating. And it's the reason why we, when you see like Godzilla movies and you see like the scale, the difference between him and a person, or you see a close up of him, or it's the reason why in horror movies everyone gets all excited when somebody gets cut up into pieces and you see everything. It's the intimacy to evil that is so aggressively shocking. But it's different. I mean, Lord of the Rings, there is no gore really. Like there's not like gushing blood coming out of somebody's chest, but like the gory, they call it like I forget what people refer to it as, but it's basically like slasher films. Like people are like obsessed with it because it's so
mhm.
gripping and like, oh, like the Saw movies, you're seeing nails go through things. Ugh. The Lord of the Rings version of that is literally just like, let's get a glimpse of this guy, and if you see him, you're like, oh my god, he's so evil. Like
Yeah.
there's no blood, but like that intimacy I think is so important. And it would have been really cool, man, just to, even if you just like stepped out of that eye and just like said a couple cool things and then walked back into it, that would have been amazing. It's a missed opportunity for sure. They went with a gift. What can you do?
Yeah, and it's weird because they got Cumberbatch to do the voice for him. And I think the
Hmm.
thing with Sauron is they want Sauron, and we know, and I know a little bit, even like from you and other folks, that like Sauron is not the greatest, most powerful evil of all time in Lord of the Rings. So that's kind of in the back of my mind. But insofar as the films, he is. He is the embodiment of darkness. And so I think they gave him a voice, but they're like, we don't want him to speak too much because we don't want anyone, like with Smaug, like with Gollum even, to form a relationship or say like, oh, he would say this or might say something stupid or something. It's like they really held him back. But like my favorite character of all time, Darth Vader, if you give him that purpose and that presence along with the voice, the
Yep.
things he says are going to be 10 times greater than anyone else ever says, because you're hanging on every word. You're like, what is he? Sauron, the true darkness is speaking to me, like he's saying something, like,
And I
oh
think
my gosh.
example of that is, and we can come back to this again, but the final words of the film when Smaug is flying through the air and he says, I am fire, I am death, like that shook me. Like he's
Yeah,
flying through the air, he just got this gold dumped all over him, he's so mad, he's so angry, and he's going to destroy Lake Town, and he says, I'm fire, I'm death. And like he could have said one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish, and it would have been so cool. You know what I mean? It's a flying dragon. So to your point, I mean, just to have him come out and have some presence, I think would have been really remarkable. And I think like, it is this amazing evil, but at the same time, like it is that very same evil that completely undoes him, and in the end undoes him,
yeah, yeah.
undoes him,
Either way.
undoes in the end, like the intricate through line of, and again, spoilers for the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the Fellowship, but like the through line of Gollum slipping through the cracks at every turn. He doesn't get killed, he survives falls, he doesn't get drowned, he always slips through the cracks, and at the very end, he's the one that ultimately destroys the ring, like it, because he was corrupted, he was taken over by evil. So like evil in Tolkien's world is such a fascinating thing, and you rarely get to see a full embodiment of it. And to have that would have just been the greatest gift. Like it would have made the Hobbit trilogy like 10x better. Like
Oh my
just if
gosh.
we had him come up and say something, I think it would have been really rad.
We'll just even grab Gandalf by the throat and pick him up or something. I'd be like, oh my gosh. I'd be
He
like,
just choke slammed
oh
Gandalf.
my
It was
gosh.
insane. Yeah.
Dude, he's about to do like he's the Undertaker. He's coming out. He's gonna do the Tombstone too. It's gonna be
It's so cool.
amazing.
Yeah.
No, man, that's a little too far. Manny, it's so funny when you bring up that final line. I do want to come back to it, but right now, I remember being in the theater and he said that, and you do that, and are those the final lines? And then Bilbo says, "What have we done?"
Bilbo says, "What have we done?" Yeah.
And then it cuts to Ed Sheeran's "Well, I've Seen Fire" or whatever, and it's
Yeah,
like,
which for the record, I fine song. Ed Sheeran's talented. I think playing this hipster ass song at the end of the Lord of the Rings film.
Yes.
I was so mad, man. I was so upset. Like, I get it, like fire in the mountains or whatever the song is. I deleted it from my memory, but it was like, really, Ed Sheeran with an acoustic guitar? That guy, he's like Mumford and Sons dude. Like,
so
I don't know. I felt so betrayed. I was like, somebody call Howard Shore because he's going to be grabbing people by the throat.
Mm-hmm.
He's so upset right now. But music aside, yes, the final scene I think is so cool. And again, just like knowing how angry Smaug is amazing, because like it's that kind of classic trope of like, we think we killed the bad guy, but we actually just pissed him off and made him even angrier. And that was our mistake. That's on us. Is tremendously scary. And again, like very simple one line from Freeman at the end, but it's so delicately and fearfully delivered that it's just like, oh my god. Like as far as cliffhangers go, I think this is one of the better cliffhangers. I think it
sure.
ended in a really powerful note for sure.
Oh, totally. And comparing it to, again, because I can't not, the End of Fellowship is more like, oh, we're just getting started. And End of Two Towers, you're like, it almost feels like if you didn't watch, for some people, and I know somebody who didn't want to go headlong into Return of the King because they felt like there was closure a bit, because it feels like, hey, the good guys won, and they're like, the battle for Middle Earth is about to begin. You're like, cool. And the Gollum song plays, and it's like, oh my gosh. But this one, you're like, oh man, like you're like, we've seen what this thing can do. Now let's do it against people who have like no warning really, and no chance. And I get where people, and we'll probably talk about it eventually, but like the beginning of Battle of the Five Armies, it feels like you're kind of cut short for people who are like, I wanted to see more of the dragon, but it's like, you can't do an hour and a half of him destroying Lake Town and then be like, we finally killed him. Like, you know, you gotta resolve that. But yeah, when you said the fire death thing, I was just, you're totally right. It's so much weight to it, and it's so freaky, and you're like, oh my gosh, like that's a good villain. And the fact that
he was saying it to himself, he wasn't that wasn't for anyone else but him. You know what I mean? So like, it is that like, it's like this weird self-affirmation.
It's a pregame
like,
pep talk.
Like, we get, yes, you're fire and your death, man. Chill out, dude. Like, you're angry. And so, and it is that just force of nature, but like the evil flavor of nature. And when you said, this town, this defenseless place without any warning, like it feels like a tiny island about to get hit by a tsunami. It has that sense of like scale and that sense of power. And thanks to 1,000 other movies and 1,000 other shows that we've seen that have dragons destroying towns, like we know what dragons can do. You know what I mean? Like Game of Thrones, like these dragons mess people's days up, So just having that absolute weight. And again, coming out of like being so pissed off, like, it's like John Wick gets punched in the face. He's not going to go down. He's just going to get angry, And so because we know how angry he is, that's scarier than he was before. He's like, now he's pissed off, like, oh my god, what an angry dragon, hell hath no wrath. So just such a cool way to close that film for sure.
Oh shoot, yeah. And you make a great point too. It's David and Goliath. David kind of won, but actually Goliath just got back up, and it was like,
and he's like pissed off.
Yeah, he's like, oh, now I'm before I was kind of toying with you. Now it's gonna be like, this is like a personal thing now. But now again, like the gif with Sauron, I'll never think of Smaug at the end not giving himself like a pep talk before the big fight. He's like, Sauron, I'm fire, I'm death, baby, I'm going to get in there. He's like,
Lake Town guys don't even know what's about to come. Come on, let's go.
It's like, it's been a little while since my last fight, but I got some gold in my teeth. I'm ready to do this. He's like, and
it's like really the first time that we see him doing dragon stuff. He's flying through the air, about to go down and burn down a town. So it feels I mean, like, again, cliffhangers are tough. I think for a lot of
Yeah.
people, myself included, cliffhangers can be a bit of a bummer, and I think they can feel cheap. But when delivered with this much weight and this much tone and character, I think it's remarkable what a cliffhanger can do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I forgot to mention this early on. I briefly mention it. Beorn's in this. He's a
Oh, that's right.
skin changer, skin walker. I forget.
Skin changer,
It's
I think is
changer.
correct.
And basically he's a very very tall, furry man, but also he
Yep.
can turn into a bear, which is
Yep.
pretty great. And he has a nice house. And if you want, you can go chill in it, but just make
You
sure
go
he's
hang
not
out.
there, like
Yep.
as a bear. Um, and that's kind of what scares off the orcs earlier on. I think Beorn's really cool. I wish there's more of him. They tease
Oh,
it in the
totally.
trailer for Five Armies, but there's
Yeah.
like he gets like
There's
no
no
play. I'm like, oh my gosh, can't you get him to join the team? I
yeah.
was like, you got a burglar who's completely visible and a bear man.
Yeah, like a
This,
man bear situation. Come
let's
on.
go. But yeah, I like Bear. I like his house. I just feel it's so weird
Totally.
that like people I was like, we can totally chill here for the night. That guy who tried to kill us, he's our host. I'm like, are you sure
Yeah.
it's cool to be here? Like, I don't feel
Yeah.
right about it. But yeah, I want more of that kind of stuff. If you're gonna kind of go more
Totally.
fantastical, I was like, oh, Beorn is so cool. I was like, he's great.
Yeah,
So
he really got the short end of the stick, man. It's like fantastic beasts and where to hide them. Like you just don't get to see very much of this guy, and
well
he had so
played.
much potential.
Oh,
I
totally.
um again, and I think it speaks to the whimsy and the sort of more fantastical nature of the Hobbit. Like a man bear. Yeah, let's do it. Give
Oh
me more of
yeah.
that.
And he's that kind of classic, like, I'll help you because I hate something more than I hate you kind of
Mhm.
thing. Like, that's
Yeah,
all it is. And you're like,
100.
oh, okay, cool. Because you start to think in your mind, you're like, well, he's a bear. He's a very strong bear. It's all of them plus Gandalf. They probably have a decent shot at this when it comes to it. It's not a Smog situation where they're just like kind of fighting for their lives. It's like they might win this, but at the same time, you're like, okay, but he's in, they're in his house. Come
Yeah.
on, let's be cool. But I also love that the orcs are afraid of him. They're like, we're not going that way. And they're like, why? And he's like,
Right.
well, the bear's over there. And they're like, what do you mean the bear's over
Bear
there?
back in that house.
He'll
Yeah.
rip you apart. And it's like, oh,
Right.
that's kind of fun. Uh, anyway, any final closing thoughts on Hobbit: Desolation of Smaug?
Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of people, generally speaking, were a little bit disappointed with the first movie, and I think this movie impressed them. I think they would probably left it. People who watched the first one were probably left a little bit more satisfied with the second one, and I tend to agree. I think it does a lot more in terms of that world building, in that it does scope, I think, really well. I think it opens up and you see the bigger conflicts from Gandalf's stuff to Smaug going towards Lake Town, but then it does the smaller things as well, the love triangle, the
Yeah,
smaller relationships going on, which I think is cool. Overall, I think the Hobbit trilogy could have been done in two movies. I think it could have even almost been done in one fairly long movie, which is Peter Jackson's jam.
yeah,
But yeah, man, I think as far as like a hardcore Tolkien lover and a hardcore Fellowship trilogy lover, I think it feels the most familiar, and I think it feels the most impactful.
yeah,
Um, at least up to this point. We can get into the next movie at some point in the future, but and I certainly think it holds up pretty well. But yeah, the second movie, it does feel let me say this. I think it suffers from the same problems that the first one does, in that it has some padding, it has some like extra fluff that maybe isn't necessarily needed, but it's certainly welcome because it's more of the world, it's more of the characters and the settings that we love so much. And so, at the end of the day, like I said last time, it's like just give me more of that world, and I probably won't be disappointed. And I think, like, again, we've talked about it a couple times with the Amazon show that's coming up. It's like it's either going to be amazing or it's just going to be a good time.
yeah.
Like I will not be disappointed by it because it's more of that place and that thing that I love.
Hmm.
I mean, unless like something very aggressive would have to happen for me to be like, this sucked.
Yeah,
So um, and I think this movie is a very good example of the latter, of that. Like, it's a good time. It's not amazing, but it's certainly not offensive. Like, it
yeah.
doesn't bum me out. So yeah, I think it's a fun one for sure.
Yeah, I pretty much echo most all those sentiments for you. I think originally I wasn't as keen on these films, even though I enjoyed them.
Yep.
But now, as I just go back, and because we have such a deluge of constant content coming at us, it's just kind of nice to go home, which is just
Totally.
Middle Earth, and any way I can get there, I really don't care. Like, I'm just happy to be there. I'm engrossed. I'm interested. The level of detail in the work, especially by the crew on these, which gets overlooked a bit, but like, man, like the outfits and stuff, like all that stuff, and the attention to detail. Or talking about like Lothlorien versus Rivendell versus where Thranduil's kingdom is. Like that stuff, I just appreciate more and more as I get older. Because I'm like, man, there's a lot of thought that went into this. Or like how
Oh,
Lake Town feels.
yeah.
Like you said, kind of. It's like if you put Bree on a lake.
Right.
I adore it. And you get more of Bilbo, which I think Unexpected Journey is his film. But you still get some good stuff from him in this one, and I do like to see the continuous corruption. I love Gandalf's side quest, and there's
Yeah.
some good fights. And Smaug obviously is so cool, is really interesting, and man, yeah, it does do a really good job of setting up that last film. And it really, like you said before, I think it's maybe one of my favorite cliffhangers of all time, because when
Yeah.
you see that, the only thing you can think after it's done is like, I gotta see what happens next, because you're
Yep.
like, oh my gosh, like they set it up
Totally.
really well, and
Yeah.
it's harrowing. You're like,
Yeah.
ah,
And thankfully for me, I watched it long after it was in theaters. I didn't watch it in
oh
theaters. And so I
really?
was like, what's gonna happen? Oh, okay, yeah, I got the next disc. Let's watch
Dang,
it.
you're
Shit.
cheating. I love it. That's great.
Like I didn't have to wait. And so it was nice. But man, and that, those 5 minutes of the cliffhanger, they were pretty intense, I'll
I
tell
had to
you what.
wait that whole year, Manny. It was, I mean, like I knew
Stop.
how it was going down. It's
Right.
not like
Right.
when Two Towers came out and then like Return of the King was coming. I was like, I don't even like, as a
Yeah.
12-year-old, like I was like, I can't
Yeah.
even. What is that? What?
Yeah. You're like, I can't even think about social studies homework, Mom. I don't know where
Exactly.
Frodo is,
And then the tie-in game came out, and I was like, if I play through
Yeah.
this, is it a spoiler? And guess what? It kind of was, because I had clips from the film. Anyway,
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah.
dang, Desolation, not too bad, not too shabby.
Yeah.
And
And I
like,
do want to say, I'd like to add, I think in 2021, Tolkien fans all around the world, let's stop just saying if it's not as good as a trilogy, it's trash. There is an in
yes,
between. There's that
yes,
middle ground, and that middle ground is totally great and acceptable. And
yeah,
I think like guys, we won. We got the greatest trilogy of all time.
hmm
Like let's be happy with that, and let's accept the things that come next. Like not everything needs to be to that standard. And frankly, I don't think anything can be to that standard. It was so specific to the time and the
yep,
technology that was out at the time and the storytelling and where Peter Jackson was in his career and where all these actors and actresses were in their careers. It was a perfect smoothie of film. And we can't have that again, guys, and that's okay. We'll have some other really good smoothies down the road. So
yeah.
the year of being good, positively thinking Tolkien fans is 2021.
Oh, I totally agree. I know Lord of the Rings would not be made the same way today, ever. I don't even know if it would get greenlit.
Yeah,
I think that people would be like, "You want a whole like this? This is the cast and crew. Like this is you want to make this? You guys are
right.
nuts." They'd be like,
Yeah,
"How do we turn this into like more?" You know what I mean?
absolutely.
And if Lord of the Rings trilogy is Everest, then guess what? The Hobbits. You know what? Like these films, they might be smaller mountains, but they're mountains nonetheless, and they're
Still mountains.
beautiful in their own ways. They're not the tallest, maybe, but guess what? They're in the same. They're in the Himalayas, baby. Don't
Yep.
you worry about it. I agree with you, man, dude. I haven't gotten to like that deep with like the Lord of the Rings fans, because like I'm sure this is how a lot of the book enthusiasts felt when the original trilogy came out as films. They're probably like,
Sure.
oh my gosh, they got where's Tom
Like,
Bombadil?
in
Like,
this, yeah,
it's
yeah.
like
Where's Tom Bombadil?
how
Yeah,
dare they? Where are the Barrow Whites?
yeah.
It's like, I'm sorry, guys. But yeah, I agree with you. And man, that Amazon show, I'll be right there with you, man.
Oh,
I'm
absolutely.
excited. I don't care what
Yeah.
it's about. I don't. If it was
We'll
just like,
do.
huh?
I was gonna say we'll do a whole series of episodes on it
Dude,
because
yeah, it's just like
great.
it's 24 episodes of them just chilling in the Shire. I'd be so stoked. I'd be like,
Yeah,
let's settle in, baby. I'd be like,
absolutely. I was. It's funny you mentioned that. I was watching a show I was watching a movie with my little sister. It was The Invitation. Have you seen this movie? It's a horror film.
I don't know if I have.
It's like these guys invite a bunch of their this man and woman invite a bunch of their friends to their very expensive house in Hollywood, and then it turns out they're like cultists and they're trying to do a mass suicide thing and
Mhm.
trick everybody into killing themselves. But like for most of the movie, it was just like a dinner party, and
Oh,
like 2/3 through, my sister was like, "Is there Is there no conflict in this movie? Because like there's just like every now and then there's like a chord, like a violin chord being played. Like it's just like, oh, tension, I guess, but
Yeah.
they're just having wine. What's happening? So like literally, if this show is just like exactly that, like 25 episodes of like going to dinner, like getting some like pulling in the harvest or whatever, I'd be like, let's go. I'm in. Let's do it.
I'm stoked. I
Yep.
just want to know what the problem is with the hiring manager at the Green Dragon. Apparently, they're
Right.
angry that they hired this new kid who's not ready for it. Oh
Exactly.
my gosh, that'd be wonderful. Yeah, no, I look forward to that and talking with you about that because I'll just be like, dude, did
For
you
sure.
see that episode? It was an episode.
Yeah.
But yes, well, that's Desolation of Smog. My hope in the future is we get to come back, circle back around, talk about Battle of the Five Armies. But please let us know what you guys think of the show. If you enjoyed this film more so, less so than the first, unexpected journey, or maybe some standout moments for you. Maybe you've never even watched this. If you're listening to this whole thing and you've never watched these films before, I am impressed. Because I would be so confused. I'd be like, what are these guys even talking about? What's this ring?
Right.
Why is everybody so obsessed with jewelry in this world? They just want to get their bling, they want to look good for their big night out.
That's
But yes, please let us know because I'm just so curious to know what people think about these films, just films in general. It's fun to have conversations about it and be
man.
positive about them. You know what I mean? It's okay. We can. That's what the
Right.
critical. You got to look for the faults and the merits. The merits, guys. Look at the merits. Anyway, we're gonna wrap up the show here with just a few brief things. But as Manny knows, we're gonna go into that segment that I like to call, the Manny likes to call, we all like to call, Time Killers, which is all the games, the movies, and TV shows we've been consuming. Manny, what have you been consuming time with, my friend?
There's a game that I don't think I've talked about before. It's called Demon Souls, and
I feel like
I
you're
can't
like
stop playing this game,
you're like a
man.
vacuum salesman who's like going up to people's
Yeah,
houses and you're like, "Hi, I have this thing here. It's called Demon Souls. I love
yeah,
it, and I think you should love it too. I'm gonna come right
yeah.
in."
You have too much time on your hands? Well, then I have a product for you. Yeah, I am still playing Demon Souls. I
Wow.
platinumed it. It was my first platinum ever. I'm
Oh.
very proud of that.
Oh,
I'm also like, where did all those hours go? It's like
yeah.
170 hours or something. But yeah, no, I'm starting. I don't want to say I'm like starting to sunset it, but
Mm.
I'm certainly focusing on other games as well. I just actually yesterday, I just beat Miles Morales on PS5. It's very good. I didn't play the first Spider-Man. Spider-Man to me has personally, and I mean no offense, has never been like a superhero that I'm like jazzed about. I
I
just
love it.
couldn't like relate to him, and I
Sure.
was like, hey, it's just like a teenage kid and he's dealing with like high school problems. Like I don't want to think about when I was in high school. That was the worst. So it just never vibed with me. But yeah, I mean like Miles Morales is charming, and he's Puerto Rican, which is like really cool to see that kind of representation for me. And like the way his mom talks is like my mom talks that way too. I get it now. And man, the combat's super good and fluid, and yeah, it was like I'm very surprised that I enjoy it, and I think it's a good game regardless of what I think, but I'm surprised that I thought it was a good game. But it was really exciting, and like I'm already playing. I'm just like continuing the story. You can kind of still do like missions and little
Yeah.
whatevers. So I've been doing that, which is very cool.
How long was your
And then
playtime on it? Just to ask.
I want to say I would probably put it around like 30
Oh,
30
really?
hours.
Okay, good. Because
Yeah.
that's a bit longer than most, and not that like that has to deal with it. I just know sometimes
Mhm.
people, and I'm interested in this too. Is like when
Totally.
they talked about this game, a lot of people were like, "Is this like DLC they're selling as a whole game, or an
Right.
expansion that's sold as a whole
Yeah.
game?" So that's good to hear that it's like
Yeah,
that long.
and I went a little bit out of the way to get some suits that I
Okay,
really
cool.
enjoyed, and so, that probably added a bit of playtime,
Hmm.
but yeah, I think it was, like, totally reasonable.
Okay.
But yeah, super enjoyed that experience. As far as movies are concerned, I just saw Get Out for the first time,
Oh yeah, what'd you think?
like, 2 weeks ago. Oh, super good, man, but, like, deeply unsettling,
Sure.
obviously, for obvious reasons, but I think it's hard, man. I think any movies or any media that really forces you to look at like systemic racism is unsettling.
Hmm.
And as a person who hasn't really, at least as far as being kidnapped and stuff goes, I've never experienced that kind of racism, and
Hmm.
so I think it was unsettling for that. And then of course, like the traditional horror elements of it are unsettling, and so I think it just made for a very unsettling experience.
Sounds
And
fun.
I have this thing where I was trying to phrase it to my sister when we watched that movie, and I have a hard time articulating this feeling I get. But so you've seen Get Out, I assume.
Actually, to be honest, I've only seen parts of it.
Okay, so okay, I'll choose a different movie then.
No, it's okay. I'm familiar with the whole plot.
Okay, so
Yeah.
like spoilers for Get Out if anyone's listening. At the end, he's like killing the girl who was like his former girlfriend and started this whole thing. Like she like basically catfished him into dating for several years, and then she like kidnapped him for her family to use as mind slaves, basically. And he's like killing her in the street, and then a police car arrives and he puts his hands up, and because of systemic racism you're like, oh my god, they're going to think this black man killed this white woman and he's going to go to jail. Oh no. But then it turns out in the car was his friend who works for the TSA, and he was driving a TSA vehicle, and he gets him out of there. Happy ending, presumably. But the movie could have ended with him getting arrested if it was a police officer, or like if the car pulled away and the woman that he killed like moved or like opened her eyes or something. And so the message of the movie was like, ooh, and maybe the cycle continued. I would have revolted. I would have started rioting in the streets. Like I have such a visceral reaction and when movies that aren't, and again, this is why I have difficulty articulating because it's so specific, but when movies end that are not traditional horror films, because I think a lot of horror films do and then maybe the killer's still out there, ooh, and like that's part of the fun. It's like, oh my god, the killer might be here tonight. But when movies do that aren't horror films, where they're like, yo, she opened her eyes, she might be still out, like I want to punch a village. Like I get so angry. And I do this thing where even if a movie did not end that way, I get mad at the fact that it could have. And
Amazing.
so like
Yes.
I was watching the movie with my friend Katie, and I was like, oh my god, that was so good, but I'm so mad. And she's like, why are you mad? It ended the way you, and I was like, yeah, but like what if she opened her eyes at the end? Ugh, that would have been such a dumb ending. And she's like, but she didn't, and the movie ended. And I'm like, but it could have.
Yeah.
It's like when my mom like used to get mad at me when I was a kid for something that I hadn't done yet,
Sure.
anticipating that I would do it. It's the same thing.
I love
So all that to say is it didn't end that way. It was very good. Get Out, it's a tremendous film. And then I watched The Invitation, which wild kind of crazy movie with like weird tension that didn't really exist, but like I guess was there. And then it did the same thing. It ended the way I wanted to, but like it could have ended differently, and I was upset that it did not.
Okay.
It's this weird complex I have, and I'm only recently learning about it.
Okay.
So yeah, it's this weird like movie thing I do. But yeah, I watched those two movies recently, and there was there's a show on I think Cinemax. It's called Warrior. It's very good.
Oh yeah.
It is based on a screenplay that Bruce Lee wrote.
Oh.
And it's
yeah.
have you seen Gangs of New York? Have you seen that movie?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's basically Gangs of New York, same time period, but with Chinese immigrants in San Francisco.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and they basically like join all these like gangs, these street gangs, and there's like rad martial arts and like all these cool rivalries and stuff. It's amazing. And I think it's like a total sleeper hit. I watched the first season last year, and the second season I think came out in like October, so I've been going through that as well. It's very good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Before we move to mine, thoughts on the ending of Inception?
Oh god, what? Okay, yeah, exactly.
Okay,
oh my god,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, yeah, that I think that one's a little more ambiguous because it was like, did it wobble? Did it not wobble? Was it about to stop spinning? I don't know.
Yes.
So like that's more of a thinker,
Sure.
But like that's a good example. But you did remind me. I also watched Tenet.
Oh, how was Tenet?
It was fine. It was fine. It was just fine, and it's a little sad because like Nolan's standards are so high.
Yeah.
But it was good. I think there's a bunch of like huge like inconsistencies and like questions that are just left unanswered, and like I had to watch like an explained video afterwards, and that made the so my initial reaction after watching the movie was like, huh, okay, that was cool. And then when I watched the explanation video, my opinion shifted to like, oh, okay, very cool. But it was never like, that's amazing, It was just like, time stuff. Yeah. It just seemed like Christopher Nolan was like, it'd be cool, time cops. Okay, that's a movie now. So but it was fun. I mean, it was definitely fun, and like the scenes of like people moving backwards and forwards and all that was very cool. But yeah, I mean, like Interstellar and movies like that, I think they just hit so high that it's hard to hit that again.
Yeah, The Prestige. It's probably my favorite. I just watched Inception recently, so that's why I was just bringing it up. I've been trying to study movies, Manny, because I'm moving out to
Ooh,
California. You know, I'm gonna be actor, producer in film. That's not
yeah.
a joke, but I'm studying films, and Inception's a weird film because like. It does follow a structure obviously, but
Mm,
because of the fact that it's like dreams within dreams within dreams, like it
yep,
starts to get weird with the time dilation of that sort of
totally.
thing. And that's why I had one friend who was like, and I'll never forget him saying this, he's like, I hate that they kept cutting back to the stupid van that was falling off the bridge. But now that I'm older, I'm like, they had to do that to say like, well, here's kind of the time, this is time
Right.
happening, and like this is kind of our barometer for where we're at. But it just makes me think about like introducing a bunch of stuff in all these movies, which he does, and then like having all like there's some rules, but there are things where you're like, but wait, like you start thinking in the film, you're like, well,
Right.
how is this even? You're like trying to take in all this information because you're like,
Right. Exactly.
so
Yeah.
yeah. And one of my favorite theories about Inception is that like Cobb's original totem is his wedding ring, and that every time you see him in a dream, he doesn't have it. But then, like in the real world, he does, or vice versa. It's one of those things where it's like you keep watching those scenes, and you're like, "Oh, really?" By the way, great cast in that one. All the Nolan films have like just exceptional casts. You're like, oh my gosh, like Michael Caine's in like all of them.
He
But
was in Tenet as well. He was in
really,
there for like 5 minutes, and I was like, "Oh, it's Michael Caine! Awesome,
he's doing
cool."
stuff.
That's why I know I'm watching a Nolan film.
I wish he would kind of like, not that he needs to marry all of, like his films together, but it would be so cool if he did have like just even little hints towards things where it's like, well, technically the Inception crew does exist within the Tenet
It would
world.
be so
Like, just
cool.
one, like you see the
The
briefcase of the dream machine
Christopher
somewhere.
Nolan cinematic universe. It'd be awesome.
Yeah, that'd be cool. But anyway, I was like, oh, Inception, that's a good. I gotta ask Manny about that. For me though, I am going to. I think we'll do a review of this. By the time you guys see this, it'll be coming out in a couple of days. But I will have a review out for Cyberpunk 2077.
Ooh, very
Um,
cool. What are
it,
your thoughts, if you care to share them? What are your like? Give
I'll
me your
never tell
watered
you.
down take.
Watered down take is thus. So I put about 40, 45 hours into it,
Oh wow!
which it probably doesn't seem like a lot. I saw somebody's review go up, was like, I put 170 hours into it.
Oh my
I'm
god!
like, really?
That's all of the hours.
I played the main campaign. I did pretty much all like the side quests, the big side quest stuff, and I was just kind of doing some small things, and like there's tons of different endings, so I was going through all those. Um,
Sure.
I think it's good. I think it's ambitious, and I feel kind of bad for it because it reminds me of a lot of other cross-gen titles where I
Yeah.
just wish they didn't have to make it for 8 or 9 different things. And
Totally.
you obviously work now for a developer, Manny. And like there's got to be part of you, and I've seen this kind of go out on Twitter too. Is like people's hearts go out to the devs because it's like not only
Oh,
is this
absolutely.
game so hard to make, it's been 7, 8, 9 years, but then on top of that, it's like I'm releasing on everything, including like a calculator. Like it feels like there's like we have to optimize every version of this thing.
Oh,
It's
100%.
so I feel
Yeah.
bad. And it's funny because my friend got me a Christmas gift, and he got the extended or the collector's edition. So he gave me like this little, it's a little tin
Oh,
for Samurai, and then it also, I swear this is not affecting my review score because they didn't send this to me because I'm too small of a YouTuber. But it comes with this little like, I don't know, it's like this cool little like necklace. It reminds me of
ooh,
Witcher
it's like a
3.
pendant. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like
That's very cool.
it's a cool little thing. But anyway,
Yeah,
I
that's awesome.
enjoyed it. If you like Keanu Reeves, you're gonna love this game. If you don't like Keanu Reeves, you were gonna hate this game because I thought he
Oh,
was only gonna be in like a small portion of it. He is
yeah.
in like. Do you remember if like for people who played Arkham Knight, if you remember the Joker, spoiler alert, in that game, it's like
Yep.
that but more, like cranked
Oh,
way
okay.
up. Like everywhere
Interesting.
you go, he's like, "Hey," you're like,
Also, like, if you don't like Keanu Reeves, like, I'm calling the police and you're gonna be arrested.
I think
So,
you should be because he seems like such
yeah,
a
no,
nice guy. We're gonna be friends
great.
one day. Keanu and I are gonna be buds,
Oh,
and
hell yeah.
he seems like such a lovely individual. And I love that people have given him so much guff over the years for not being like they're like, oh, he's not a good actor and all that stuff. It's like, yeah, no, I think whatever he's doing, it's working. Like
Yeah, it's
he's not letting
phenomenal.
it slow him down. He's not like, well, people hate me and I should leave. It's like people love
Yeah,
him
yeah.
and they want him in everything now. They're like, oh, it's Keanu in my movie, and now he's gone. It's like he's
Yeah,
here and he's
exactly.
gone. It's like
Yep.
um, and his little spiel on the Game Awards, he just seemed so excited to be part of
Oh,
this
yeah.
game. I just love him so much. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a first person shooter though, first person combat. So
Mm,
let's take that into consideration. Besides
totally.
Witcher, I thought it was fun. I thought it was fine. it didn't blow me the way I thought, blow me away the way I thought it would originally. But it's
Yeah,
hard because
yeah,
there's so much expectation, and CD Projekt Red,
yeah. It's tough, man.
it's high, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, and, like, I certainly don't claim to know any of the issues that they're dealing with
Sure.
or how development went, but, yeah, I totally feel for the developers that poured so
Yeah.
much into that game, you know, I'm sure a lot of the problems were not necessarily in the hands of the developers. I think, I'm sure it was super challenging for a lot of different parts of the company at many different levels but no, I mean, like, the people who have stuck with it, I've heard really good things.
Yeah.
And so I'm definitely yeah, I think I'll probably play it after I don't know, a couple more 100 hours in Demon Souls, and I'll clear some space on my
Yeah, that
calendar.
makes sense. Yeah. But I will have more like detailed thoughts coming out soon. And I've kind of, Manny, I don't know if you know this, but I've moved away from scores. I think scores are good for some.
Yeah.
I feel like it's one of those things where it's like I'm a teacher who gave this long lecture, and the kid at the end was like, "Hey, can you give me like the 2 sentence version of that?" Which like a
Yeah.
review score to me is like, it's a this, it's a that. Um,
Yep.
and like the more I put time into like making things and want to get into the business of making things, the harder it is for me to like look at hours and hours and hours, like, lifetimes of people working on a thing
Yep.
and being like, that's a 6, or whatever. I'm like, it's
Yeah.
like, I can't do that. Plus, coming in late because everybody else's scores are already up or whatever, it's like, I can do
Sure.
whatever I want.
That's right.
It's like, I'll take
With
my
the
time and
knowledge
I'll
of the
review
character.
this and it'll be fine.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think it's worth people's time, but I can understand why people want to wait a little bit, to get some of the
definitely.
kinks worked out. And a lot of that too, I feel bad because it's like a lot of the bots who bought up like um a lot of the consoles, so I bet a lot of people were hoping, like myself, to get it on Series X or PS5 and be like, yeah, this
Right.
is like the reason I'm getting this thing. So and then they're like, well, I didn't get one of those consoles, so I have to play it on my PS4 or my
Yeah.
Xbox One, and that's where the issues really are, more systemic. Man, I wish big games like this, Manny. I just don't want them to be cross-gen because I'm like always like, it's compromised. Like Persona 5 is compromised. Like I'm like,
Right.
should just like,
Right. It's hard, man. I mean, yeah, like, especially, like, at this juncture of, like, both, like, not cross-platform, like, you can't play them across platforms, but the
yeah,
different platforms and, like, just it's such a weird time. This is certainly the first time that I've been in the industry where there's been a new generation of consoles, and so it's wild,
yeah.
man. It's nuts, yeah, a lot of work, has gone into that game, yeah, I'm sure, like, gosh, and I agree, like, it's tough to look at all the scope of all that work and effort and be like, "Man, number," you know?
Yeah.
So, I totally get it. Yeah.
I'm not cut out to be a critic all for my whole life, man. I just can't, my heart is just, I can't do it. I'm like, oh, these poor
Gotta do the
people.
most.
I try to be as
Yeah,
objective as possible, but you just can't not be subjective, right? Plus, if you don't like cutting people down with the katana, well, I'm sorry, most of my gameplay is gonna be that because that's what
yeah,
I did in a shooting game like a crazy person. I'm like, I'm just
that's
gonna run at you. I'm gonna
yeah,
Deathstroke this baby. I'm gonna just slice you up. Man, which was a lot of fun. I had a good time with that.
good.
Anyway, we're doing a whole show on this next week, Mandy, but I did watch Wonder Woman 1984 last night. I have thoughts.
Ooh, okay.
It's
Yeah, a lot of
interesting.
people
A
do.
lot of
It's
people do. But I
yeah.
also watched Soul yesterday that came out on Disney Plus, which is Pixar's
Oh,
newest.
yeah. Yeah. I heard people are going nuts about that. It's
People,
supposed to be very good.
okay, people really, from the consensus I saw, people loved it.
Yeah.
I didn't. I'll be honest. It was fine.
Oh, wow.
I
Okay.
really, and somebody said this really well once. I think there's like, when I watch like Ratatouille or The Incredibles, and those are both Brad Bird joints, it's very, it's like it's a kids movie, but it was made like with the vein of adults.
Sure.
And there's like a movie like that in here, but there's this whole like, it feels like Inside Out meets Coco. It's like
Interesting. Okay.
it's like this kind of the afterlife or before life, and there's all these kind of like cute images, and I mean the visuals and stuff are incredible. It looks so good, but the overall message, and I maybe you're like this too, Mandy. At the end of it, and this is not a spoiler, but it is left kind of ambiguous to how things do shape
Okay.
up for everybody. And
Yeah.
that kind of stuff drives me nuts because I
Okay.
feel like I got on a roller coaster, and right before the big finale, they like escorted me off and they're like, "How do you think the roller coaster should have ended?" And I'm like, "What do you No, you're
Oh,
supposed to
interesting.
I'm on the ride." And they're like,
Yeah.
it's whatever you want it to be. And I'm like, what do
They're
you
like,
mean?
really, the roller coasters are the friends you made along the way.
Exactly. I'm like,
they're like, I only made enemies.
Exactly. I'm like, I get it. There's a really beautiful message in this film, but at the same time, it just frustrates me because I'm like, I'm as someone who wants to make things, I don't want to give people these ambiguous endings, and I get why people want to do that, so it allows people to. It's like looking at a piece of art, and you can say like, oh, I think it means this, and I think it means that, but. If at the end, if the ring didn't fall, it was about to fall into Mount Doom, and they cut it, and Peter Jackson walked out, and he's like, "Well, what do you think what happened here? It could be anything." I would have lost my mind.
Maybe an eagle caught him as he was falling. Did you ever think about that?
It's like, oh my god, my god. But anyway, you should check it out. It's on Disney Plus now, and it's so weird to watch these theatrical releases at home. I love it because I could pause it and be like, I'm gonna go to the bathroom. I'm gonna get a drink or whatever.
Sure.
But it did feel weird watching like Wonder Woman on my TV. And also they did aspect ratio changes, which maybe only bothers me. It didn't happen all the time, but the beginning of the movie is like this my full TV screen, and I was like, this is gorgeous. And then later on, I was like, I got bars. I think maybe I'm nuts. I'm like,
that's fair. That's fair.
But yeah, you should check all of those out. But we'll be talking about Wonder Woman 1984. Are you going to check that out at all, Manny?
I think so. I admittedly haven't seen the first one, so I should probably start there.
Yeah.
Like the visuals and the vibe, like the 80s are like super cool. And so I'm super interested. Like I feel more compelled to watch the second one than I did the first one.
Sure.
But I don't want to watch the second one without watching the first.
Yeah, I wouldn't. A lot of it's steeped in the first one.
Right.
Which is it's weird. After watching this, I feel like the 80s are on their way out though. Like as far as like pop culture's obsession with them, because like I felt like Stranger Things was like the height of it. It was like 80s is everywhere, and it was like now I feel like
it's like morphing. Like I think a lot of the vibes like in cyberpunk, I think like just the general cyberpunk aesthetic draws a lot from the 80s.
Totally.
Like wires and goggles and lo-fi music and stuff. But yeah, no, that's true. I think like classic 80s tropes are kind of on their way out. Yeah,
maybe, which is okay. I'm okay with that. Not that 90s needs to be in, even though it was the greatest decade. No, I'm just kidding. I was gonna say, well, I just mean the best people were born in the 90s. You know what I mean? But anyway, so that kind of wraps up what we've been killing time with. It's fun to talk about these things, and honestly, I'm always curious to hear what people like. If I miss something that people like, you should go watch or play this. Always let me know, because there's always things that I'll miss. Also, I finished The Crown season 4 on Netflix. Holy crap! Everybody should watch that show. It is. Nice. It's really interesting. And then I watched a documentary on Princess Diana. I've never been into the royals before. I've never watched anything about the royals, and I was like, this is fascinating. And the way that the show captured actual events, I was like, wow, you guys really put your money into this. I was like, bravo, Netflix. It's like their Emmy show. I feel like they put all the stuff. They're like, it's like Downton Abbey meets West Wing, and that's what it is. So if you like either of those things, you might enjoy it.
Now I get why you said Happy Christmas to me earlier. I was like,
my gosh, the Brits, man. It started with Harry, and it's gonna end with well, there's another Harry. Anyway, there you go. All right, we're gonna finish up the show. We've been talking so long, it's been great. But we're gonna talk about my favorite segment, which is community feedback and questions. A few questions came in quick. This one comes in from Mecha Rekka on our Discord. Thank you, Mecha Rekka. Wes, so good. He said 2 questions, Jimmy. This one, then Manny, this is also for you. What was your video game highlight of the year? Now, because Manny's coming fresh to these, I was like, I'll think of them. I'll go first.
Okay. Yeah. Go for it.
My highlight was the moment in Ghost of Tsushima when I activated Ghost Stance for the first time on stream, and I started cutting through guys in the story. I was blown away. And it came to mind pretty quickly. I was like, oh yeah, that moment was so good. I was like, yes. The game spoke to me. I was like, yeah, we get each other in this moment. I loved it.
Have you done any of the Legends mode?
I haven't, because I have no one to play with.
Oh, shucks.
So yeah, I wanted to. Man. Yeah, I've seen your tweets about it.
It's not cross-platform, is it?
Huh?
It's not cross-platform, is it? Right?
No, I don't. Well, it was it is on PlayStation. It's only PlayStation 4.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I guess I looked down at my unplugged PlayStation 4 sitting on the floor over here. I was about to be like, I don't have a PlayStation 4. Then I was like, I guess, you're right there.
It's like sitting there. It's like, how dare you?
Yeah.
Was it fun? Or the Legends stuff? Is that fun?
It's very good, man. And I was so impressed with, like, it was not an afterthought.
Yeah.
A lot of games like that can just kind of have a tacked on multiplayer mode, but this felt so intentional, and super long, man. It was like
Really?
hours,
Really?
and it was extremely challenging. Like, I have a couple friends, and we were playing through it, and I mean, there were times where we would play for like 6 hours and not even get through like a single chapter
Oh,
because it was
really?
so, yeah.
That's
Um,
so cool. See, like I wanted to do that. The problem is the most of the people I know on PlayStation. And this is not a slight against Masoni ponies, which that also is not supposed to be a slight against you. Is that most of them are like, we should totally do this, and I'm like, yeah, we should, and then I never hear from them. Then
yeah,
I'm like,
I
okay.
totally get it.
I'm
Yeah,
like,
yep,
all right. I
yep.
wanted to. I had like one friend who's like, we should totally do this, and I'm like, we won't though. It's like
They're like, I know, but I'm contractually obligated to say this.
yeah,
Bye.
yeah, I'm like, it really hurts my heart.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, oh, they made a samurai game which I love, and they're like, how would you play with your friends? And I'm like, that sounds perfect. And they're like, your friends don't want to play with you. They don't. They want to play Call of Duty. And I'm like,
Yeah. You're like,
mm-hmm,
okay, happy
good.
Christmas to me.
Yeah. But anyway, that was my gaming highlight of the year that I can recall right off the. If I had a
Awesome.
specific moment. Anyway, how about for
Yeah,
you?
that's a very good one.
Thank you.
Like, I was just gonna be like, bah, Demon Souls, but because you made yours so specific,
Ah,
I would say, oh man, I mean, it's definitely in Demon Souls. I just don't know what part
yeah.
of Demon
Let's
Souls.
not kid on it. Let's not kid ourselves here,
um,
Manny. We know.
I think I think platinuming it was very cool, but it was also like, the reason I don't platinum games is because I don't want to take something I love and turn it into a checklist. But then my friend
Yes.
platinumed it, and then I was like, man, I want to platinum it.
Yeah.
Like, I got a tattoo of it, and I was like, man, I should probably platinum it if I'm gonna get this thing permanently on my body forever.
Mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I would say the final. I think the ending of Demon Souls is one of the coolest endings. I think it's my favorite ending of all the Souls games that I've played, and so it was just really cool. And like, lore wise, I'm like obsessed with the Souls games lore, and I've watched like hundreds of hours of like lore analysis. Like, it's bad.
Dude, it's
I
cool.
was watching it downstairs on we just got this beautiful new TV. It's like 50 whatever inches, and we got
Mhm.
like a sound bar and all this stuff. And it's like 4K refresh rate, this, that, and the other thing. And of course, the first thing I do, I like go to the YouTube app, and I'm watching like Demon Souls lore videos. And my roommate looks up at me, and he's like, "I've never seen you so intently focused on anything." And I was like, "I know." So yeah, I would say that, and I think it's just really cool because it was one of the first Souls games. Technically, like, Kingsfield came before it way in the
Mm-hmm.
90s, but and so I think to remake it like, Bluepoint is, they are wizards at what they do, and they just
Mm.
made such an amazing remake, and like, it's just completely reinvigorated the community. And so, like, I think that's really, really special. So yeah.
That's so
So I
cool.
guess I just ended up saying all of Demon Souls. Haha.
There you go.
Uh,
You can do that. That can be a gaming moment because it'll stand out in your mind. And it's so funny. I've always had this joke in my mind. And when you talked about getting the tattoo on your arm, all I can think of is across my shoulder blades now to say, I am fire, I am death. Just, they'd be like, you really
It'd be
want this?
so
I'd be like,
perfect. Yeah.
yeah, dude, I want it right here. They'd be like, you're so
Yeah.
nice. I'd be like, yeah, I know, but I want people to know.
And,
Um,
yeah.
sneak up behind me. Anyway, next question comes in again from Megarek. He said, what are your New Year's resolutions going to be in the new year
Oh man.
or the next year?
It's tough. I have, admittedly, I've always kind of scoffed at New Year's resolutions
Mm-hmm.
because I think uh I think they can sometimes just be a fake thing we put into the universe for the sake of looking like we have resolutions,
Yeah.
myself included. Like, I've totally been like, I'm gonna go do a thing, and then I'll like put it on Twitter, and I'll be like, it's out there, not really gonna do it, but it's out there, and people will think that that's something I care about. So I think, um but this year, I think this year has been so challenging and different and weird for a billion million reasons. And so I think, yeah, I think just in general, I think it takes a lot of intention. I think you have to be very intentional about how you treat yourself. And so I think, in the new year, I think I want to work a little harder at just being a little bit kinder to myself, and giving myself the time and space I need to, process things, and take time away from work if I have to, or even from like friends, and just be like, I want to just vibe by myself and play
Yeah.
some Demon Souls or something. So I think, just being a little bit more intentional about that. And last year, I jokingly said I wanted to look like, what's the guy that's going to be playing? He's the new Camille Nanjiani. He's going to be in a
Oh
Marvel
yeah.
movie.
Hmm.
Remember when he like showed up and he was like rips?
Yeah.
Yeah, my joke resolution last year was to look like that by the time this year ended. And I've had
Yes.
Chinese food for 3 days back to back, so that didn't happen.
Oh, really? Okay. What's your go-to Chinese food flavor or meal?
Oh, General's Chicken for sure.
Mm,
I would desolate a small lake town if I could have if I could
beautiful.
have. Thank you. That was a little callback.
Yes.
Yeah, but I did buy. I ordered a workout mace, an exercise mace.
What?
It is a steel pole and a 15-pound ball at the end of it. And so that'll be here on Monday. So once my hand heals, I will be swinging that thing around so I can, go into battle and defend the honor of my friends and family.
Dude, tag me in the tweets. I just got some resistance bands, so I'm starting to feel a
Oh,
little bit
nice.
like it's not gonna be like the mace and stuff. That sounds
I
great.
like
I
it.
was like, did you just
Yeah.
purchase a weapon and you're just calling it like it's like a workout? I've got my
It's a
workout katana
workout.
right over here. It's right
Yeah,
over here.
that's
I just
right. I
swing it
saw a
around.
friend of mine, Erica Ishii. She's a wonderful person. She does voice acting in a handful of games and
Oh,
stuff.
cool. Hi, Erica.
And she's awesome. She recently posted videos of her working out with like a mallet, like a straight up mallet. And I was like, "What weight is it?" And she's like, 10, 15 pounds. And I was like, "All right, this is my new thing. I'm going to be a
That's so
mace
cool.
person from now on."
Dude, that's
So
so
I
sick.
guess some mace stuff in 2021. I guess. Yeah.
Nice.
What about you? What are your resolutions if you have them?
My resolution is to move forward without focusing too much on the past, because if you're trying to move forward and you have your head turned looking backwards, you're gonna trip. You're gonna
Yeah.
falter. So I'm gonna do my best to strive forward, try to be kinder, and just try to be a general better person, as I always try to be. It's hard though. It's hard, especially in the times when we're recording this. But
For
my
sure.
hope, my hope is that I get the opportunities and the chances that I seek and long for, but also don't squander that, and don't forget to retain that humility, which is good because if you've been doing this stuff, Manny, as long as I have, I don't know if there's anything much more humbling than that. You just got to keep going, baby. You
You
just got to keep
gotta keep
fighting. You know
running.
what I mean? Like it's all
Yeah,
right. It's all good.
that's
Um,
right.
yeah, and just yeah, like I said, just try to be nicer. Which I'm sure a lot of people are like, "Come on, dude, you're so nice." I'm not like constantly kind, all like you can't be that all the time forever,
Sure.
but just trying to recognize that other people, you're going through, things you can't even comprehend or you don't understand, and everybody's fighting an internal struggle even if they don't see it. So just that compassion, which I feel like has been in very short supply all around this year, which is really
Yeah.
unfortunate. It's just like, yeah. So it's so weird to me, Manny. It's like you have this thing for the first time in modern history that should unite us, and it hasn't.
Yeah.
You're like, we have a common enemy. Everybody can agree this thing sucks, and there's people
Yeah.
out there probably like that doesn't exist, and it's like, oh
Yeah.
no, it's like
I don't know. I've never seen the enemy with my face. I've never seen him with my eyes, so he might not exist.
it's like
I'm gonna go
it's like
to a party.
it's like come on.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's kind of my resolution. I don't really have any. Like, I wonder if maybe Wes was asking more like specific gaming resolutions.
And we're like deep personal things, but hey, it's the show.
That's
Okay.
the show. Yeah. So, but great question nonetheless. I want to hear what people's news resolutions are
Yeah.
as well. Seriously, because like Manny, like you said, I'm also not a person who gets too into news resolutions. I just try to be a better person because I found that more often than not, it's a lot of people who say things and then they can't follow through with them because they don't dedicate the time or it's
Right.
not in their
Yeah.
mindset to do it. It's like I'm gonna go to the gym every day for the whole year, and I'm like, that's not gonna happen. Like, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, it's just
100%.
not
Yeah.
gonna happen. Even though I do miss my gym, I miss going to the pool, Manny. Oh my gosh,
God.
I'm starting to
Sounds
show. I'm starting to just. I need those resistance bands. I'll be in the pool,
Yeah, man.
but on the ground in my living room with like on the
Yeah.
like. That'll be really sad. I won't make a picture or video of that. Anyway, last question comes in. This is so good. This one comes in from Zora Caviar. He says, "What is the most guilt-inducing piece of media on your backlog? Doesn't have to be limited to video games." I'll start.
Yeah,
It's
definitely.
Die Hard. I haven't seen Die Hard. All right, I know everybody loses their mind. They're like, "You
Okay.
haven't seen Die Hard?" I know it's a
Yeah.
Christmas movie. I don't know. It's not even guilt. Or fully RoboCop. I wasn't born in the '80s, guys. Like I was a
Yeah.
child in the
I get
'90s.
it. I get
Um,
it.
but it's mostly that. I don't know. How about
Okay.
you?
Gosh, I guilt inducing. That's very specific, and that's a very
I
good because you could have just been like, "What's in your backlog?" But like guilt-inducing.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the games on my shelf.
Keep thinking. I still have to finish Dragon Quest 11. By the way, I have a final boss in Dragon Quest 11. I was grinding out levels for, and I didn't finish it, and it like hurts my heart. Like I gotta get back to it.
I have not played a minute of Skyrim in my life.
Really?
And and guess what? I'm not gonna do it. Okay, internet people. I'm sure it's great with all your dragons and your Dovahkiins. Is that's something, right? Yeah. No, I never played it. A friend of mine in college, he injured his knee, and he sat around just getting so high and playing Skyrim. This is Steve. You know Steve.
Oh, Steve. Wait, Steve Bastek?
Steve Bastek. Yeah,
he took an arrow to the knee.
He injured his knee, I think, playing flag football with us.
Steve.
Yeah, and he spent like months, like 4 months or like a whole semester just sitting in his room, recreational drugs, and played Skyrim. And I would sit with him, and I would oftentimes skip class and just sit and watch him play Skyrim. And I was always like, yeah, I get it. It looks rad. But I feel like, I don't know, especially now, I think open world games are really they're intimidating. It's just like, who has the time? Even though like I have 175 hours in Demon Souls, but yeah. So I've never played Skyrim. I think I feel a little bit bad for it considering my place of employment as well. But yeah, I would say I feel a little guilty. But that being said, I'm not going to play that game.
Sure. So. I played it a little bit in college myself, and I did not see what all the fuss was about. So I was like, no thanks. Yeah. But that's okay. Yeah. You can't speak to everybody. And I love how honest you were about it. And that's so funny because I know Steve. And that's even better now. If Steve's watching, hi, Steve. I don't.
Hey, Steve.
But if you are, I just know that I love you, Steve. I love talking about Terminator with him. I'd never seen the Terminator films.
You guys love Terminator.
Yeah, we watched I thought Terminator 1 and 2 with him, and it was really fascinating. I was like, okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and they hold up pretty well. So maybe those Die Hard, RoboCop won't be as rough as I think they'll be. I saw the RoboCop reboot, so I saw Live Free or Die Hard in the theater, and I thought that was pretty fun. Timothy Olyphant is a fun villain. Anyway, but yeah, great question though. Great questions from Wes and Zora Caviar, or Mecha Rekka and Caden and other names. But anyway, if you guys ever want to reach the show, if you guys want to send in a question, all you have to do is you can either email us. You can email me, and that's gocriticalreviews@gmail.com. Please send me an email. I would love to hear. If I get an email from anybody, I might lose my mind. It'll be really nice. But if you want to tweet me a question, all you have to use is the hashtag Critical Podcast, and you can find us at GoCritical, or I'm at JimmyGood013 because Twitter won't give me at JimmyGood, even though that guy is clearly not using it. Anyway, if you'd like to tweet at Manny, where can they find your beautiful face?
You can find my big old dumb face at @IamJitsu. That's JITSU on Twitter, and I think I'm on the same thing on Instagram.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Do it. Well, it's all right. I'll start tagging him and things, and you'll see him, and you'll be like, "That's the guy." That's the guy. I've been told by multiple sources, that your face is indeed not dumb. So
you're very kind.
Thank you. There you go. That's if you come on my show, it's again, I don't need to flatter him. I just like to. It's just fun for me.
Yeah. In the mail.
Yeah. The check. Yes. All right. So I'm gonna get $1. So I'm gonna go spend that. Anyway, if you guys want to support the show, there's a lot of different sites and things you can do. We have our official website, but we also have our Instagram, our TikTok, our Spreadshirt. I feel like I'm missing something here. Our Facebook. Please go to any of those if any of those things are of your liking, or you can support us over on patreon.com/criticalreviews. But honestly, all I really want people to do, besides our lovely patrons who are supporting us, thank you so much. I appreciate you guys. You guys are the reason we continue to do this. Just watch some videos. Let me know what you think. Because guess what? I make some of the best stuff on the internet you've never seen. Because it's really... I've had people comment, they're like, oh, your view count is not proportional to the equality of this work. And I'm like, hey, thanks, Mom. Stop making those fake accounts. I know you're out there.
Hey, this is Mom Gamer 420. Yeah. Great video. Yeah. And you're like, Mom, that doesn't work.
Oh my gosh. She's like, lol, raffle. Oh no.
I'll give this video 3 raffles. You're like, "Mom, please
Yeah,
stop."
you're like, you know what? That's engagement though, so I'll take
Yeah.
it. No,
I
it's
will
just
say, my mom gave me a Ghost of Tsushima shirt for Christmas. I was blown away. Yeah, and she was like, "I saw you tweet about it," and I was like, "We're gonna have a conversation about that, mother." She's like, "Yeah, isn't that like Ghost of Tsushima?" And I was like, "Close enough. Merry
oh
Christmas,
my
mom."
gosh.
So,
She's like,
yeah,
is it like that food? There's that Fruit Ninja game, like you making some
yeah,
sushi or something. Oh my gosh, I want that. Like, you should
was
record that conversation. Your
very
mom sounds
impressed.
so cool. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. But anyway, yes, please check that stuff out. And I just made like for some odd reason I decided to make 2 Lord of the Rings videos centered around those things recently, and Manny actually proofread the scripts.
Yeah,
So thank you, Manny, for doing that. Those
of
videos
course. Anytime, man.
they're fun to make, and you know what? I was like I said, 20 years on. Let's make some Lord of the Rings videos. Let's do it.
Yeah,
We finally I circle back around to it. Anyway, Manny, thank you for being on the show. I
of
appreciate you so
course,
much, my
man.
friend.
Yeah,
And
this was super fun. Like,
oh,
anytime, literally, drop of a hat, I'll be here.
oh my gosh, you're too good to me. Anyway, thank you. And for everybody who listened or watched, I appreciate you. And until next time, just remember to adapt and overcome.